Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this resumption of Monday night's Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. And when we last were with each other, we were hearing from a delegation from Denise Baker on behalf of the residents. And at this time, I would invite Ms. Baker to, I think we have the same regrets as always, so nothing's changed. But thank you for that. So I'll invite Ms. Baker to resume.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Worship, members of council. When I left off last evening, I was talking about the traffic study, and I just want to start back there before I move on to the issue of shadowing. As I mentioned last night, with respect to the traffic study, planning staff have raised no concerns with the traffic study that was submitted with the application. However, the residents throughout this process have indicated that their everyday experience is very different from what was articulated in the traffic study. There continues to be a concern that the 87 parking spaces proposed for the site will naturally attract 87 vehicles, and that will exacerbate a problem on Brookfield Road, especially for cars going to the intersection of Brookfield and Lakeshore and trying to turn left. That's not a signalized intersection, and the residents have indicated that they currently experience substantial difficulty with that particular maneuver. There's concern that the additional vehicles will instead travel south through the residential neighborhood and east over to Brock Street, where there is a signalized intersection, in order to turn left, increasing the number of cars through this residential neighborhood, which I might add has no sidewalks on it. So there's the concern of increased conflict between pedestrian traffic and vehicular traffic that was not addressed in the traffic study. Given the number of concerns raised by the residents with respect to the submitted traffic study, I submit to you it would have been useful and even appropriate to have had the traffic study peer reviewed prior to planning staff providing their comments. Moving on to the issue of shadowing. Planning staff acknowledge in their staff report that the shadowing during the winter months will have impacts on adjacent properties, specifically to the east. But I'd like to show you the shadow studies that were submitted with the application. And I'm going to start with the April 21st shadow study that was produced. I'm going to see if maybe that's the best way to do it. I'll wait till it zooms in. Zooming.
Hello, the bus. Can we zoom in, please?
Thank you. And if we could dim the light so that we can see the contrasting colors as well, I think that would be helpful. But in terms of what's on your screen before you, you'll see that the shadow study for the month of April, and just to orient you, this is Brookfield and this is Lakeshore. And these are the townhouses that have been referred to as being substantially lower in grade. And so the red that's on the screen before you demonstrates the shadowing from the proposed building. So you'll note in the afternoon of April in the springtime, the rear yard amenity space of the townhouses at 98 Brock Street are completely in shadow. So their rear yards will have gone from an enjoyable sunny spot to now one that is completely in shadow. And that's in April, which I would suggest is, although maybe this year it will be a winter month, is not typically a winter month. Here are the shadow studies for June. If you notice at the end of the day in June, so at the as we're heading into summer, the entire rear yard of the property to the south on Brookfield, their rear yard as a result of this building will now be entirely in shadow, as will a portion of the rear yards of the townhouses. In September, the rear yards of 98 Brock are entirely in shadow at 2 o'clock. and the rear yards and front yards and building are entirely in shadow at the end of the day. So you come home from work, you're trying to enjoy some of the late afternoon sun prior to heading in the fall, and now the shadow cast is completely over the building, the townhouse buildings. And finally, in December, which I'm assuming is the winter month that's referred to in the staff report, you'll notice that the shadow extends north across Lakeshore Road, so it leaves the sidewalks along Lakeshore Road entirely in shadow. I would say a small portion of the rear yard of the townhouses. And then throughout the day, that shadow creeps across into the rear yard and over the homes of the townhouses, leaving them, a good number of them, predominantly in shadow in December. So I would say that the revisions to the application that were mentioned by Mr. Demchuk in his presentation yesterday do not, in fact, minimize the shadowing impact. I think it's logical to conclude that the smaller in height the building is, that would minimize the impact of the shadowing. I would suggest that the shadow study produced by the applicant does not result in impacts that would comply with Section 1119 of Livable Oakville, which expressly requires the minimizing of shadowing impacts on the adjacent properties. And I just want to say, in conclusion, the residents are not in any way anti-development with respect to this site. This is not a situation of not in my backyard. This is not a situation of we don't want an apartment building. This is a situation where there needs to be a development that is appropriate and compatible with the existing stable residential neighborhoods. That is one of the key objectives of Livable Oakville, that and intensification. And intensification, the goal of intensification, it can't be intensification at all costs. An appropriate building with an appropriate number of units would still qualify as intensification on this site, but still would also have the impact of protecting the stable residential neighborhood. What's proposed on this site entirely maxes out the site with the sole justification that it's designated CBD, which allows a 4-story height limit. And therefore, it should be approved because it provides for intensification. But I submit to you, frankly, Oakville's better than that. The analysis should be more comprehensive and more complex to ensure that the appropriate balance between maximum intensification and compatibility with existing residential neighborhoods is struck. So in summary, in case there's any confusion, we're asking you to refuse the application for the following reasons. There are serious concerns with the designation of the lands at 87 Brookfield. Our interpretation, based on the background work to Livable Oakville, is that these lands are and continue to be designated low-density residential, and the applicant should have been required to file an official plan amendment. Second, there is no justification in the land use planning report submitted by the applicant why these lands should be rezoned to C3R. Specifically, if they are to be rezoned to C3R, there's no justification as to why the area-specific regulations in the existing bylaw pertaining to height and density would not apply. And if you recall, that's 3 stories and 10 meters with a density of 50 units per site hectare. And what is proposed is in the density of 130, a building of 4 stories, 16 meters with a 6-meter rooftop mechanical above that. It's conceivable that in order to implement Livable Oakville, the height could be increased to 3 stories and 12 meters as is contemplated in the in-zone for this site. And as you recall, I took you through what's proposed in the in-zone. That's proposed for approval by staff. And it says for this site or for sites zoned CBD that abut residential. And I'm going to tell you right now, there are very few sites in Oakville where the CBD abuts residential that would warrant this provision in the in-zone. Very few of them. This is one of them. And you'll hear about another one in a few minutes. But it's conceivable that this could be increased to 3 stories and 12 meters as contemplated in the in-zone for this site. And that is, of course, before you for approval in a few weeks. But there's no justification for the height, number of stories, and density in this particular area. We have heard that there's an as of right for a 3-meter side yard setback to the east, and the residents should be happy with the revised proposal that provides for the 7-meter setback to the below-grade garage. And if you recall the schematic that Mr. Demchuk put up that showed the townhouses to the east over here and showed you the 7-meter setback to the below-grade garage. But I would submit to you that even if the building was of a lesser height, that 7-meter setback would be required. You heard from planning staff it was required for issues of grading and drainage and for landscaping and for privacy. So I'm confident that the minimum 3-meter side yard setback would be increased through the site plan process. And that would be to ensure sufficient setbacks and no adverse impacts in terms of grading, drainage, and of course shadowing. And finally, the shadowing studies. We simply dispute the findings on page 17 of the staff report that states shadowing during winter months will impact on adjacent properties. I think the shadow study submitted with the application demonstrates that there'll be unacceptable adverse impacts during most seasons. Therefore, we ask you to refuse this development application as it represents overbuilding on a lot at the very periphery of the downtown, and it doesn't preserve or protect the stable residential neighborhoods. It's entirely out of character and not needed to achieve the town's intensification objectives. And subject to your questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you very much for your submissions. Are there questions, Council? Thank you very much for your Councillor Damo.
Did you say it's a 6-meter mechanical room?
It is, yes.
So 18 feet for mechanical?
19, yes.
So I have a question for staff. Why does the mechanical need to be so high? I guess I'm somewhat metric. It just didn't dawn. I didn't do the conversion until Ms. Baker was speaking. But 18 feet is twice as high as I am. So what do you need that? Like, how big is that room? Can't do my math 3 times.
Yeah. So through you, Mayor Burton, that is a standard clause within our zoning bylaw in terms of having a 6-meter height limit. Typically, it's required specifically usually for elevator shafts, as those project quite higher compared to, for example, like a staircase, right, which would also project above the roof building height. Now, would it be necessarily 6 meters? No, sometimes it can be shorter. However, we allow typically for the 6-meter, basically for a few reasons. One being building code, secondly being to allow for room for that flexibility. So it could be shorter, but that's our standard.
Thank you.
Wait, I have a follow-up. By any chance, is this elevator intended to serve the rooftop?
There could potentially be the elevator shaft that goes to the top, and yes, there would be an exit from there.
So if there were no rooftop amenity, might the elevator shaft not be as high?
No, you would still need the elevator to extend above.
Even if you weren't bringing the car to the roof?
Absolutely.
Interesting. Thank you. So, Madam Clerk, is there another delegation? No. Are there members of the public with information for council on this file? I think I see a hand in the aisle. You're welcome to come down, introduce yourself, and share your information with the council.
Thank you, Your Worship. My name is Paul Johnston. I'm here on the behalf of the applicant. If this is the right time to hear me, I'll be happy to proceed.
I think this is it.
Okay.
And because you're also very tall, which perhaps not 9 feet, but could you, thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, and for the opportunity to address you this evening. Obviously, we are here asking that you accept the recommendations of the staff who have undertaken, we think, an exhaustive year-long review of this project. have asked for and received modifications to the proposal in order to address public concerns and arrived at a point where they are comfortable as professional planners in recommending to you its approval. We think that process was careful and, in fact, exhaustive, and the project merits your support. Councillors will know, in particular the two ward councillors will know, that there were working meetings involving area residents. There were discussions around all of the issues you've heard. I think almost all the issues that Ms. Baker addressed. There may have been some new ones she introduced. But the key issues of height and massing and shadowing and traffic have been discussed at length. And as you know, technical studies were required and provided on behalf of the applicant to provide substance for the proposal. So this is a very, very serious decision council has to make. For example, one of the studies that was required was a planning justification study. And your own staff have done the equivalent of a planning justification study. They and I have done an analysis of livable Oakville. And they've come to the same conclusion I have, that it meets all those policies. And they are independent people you pay to give you advice. And with the greatest of respect to the submissions of Ms. Baker, that is not her role. And the residents don't offer a planning opinion to you, but you have one from your staff. So I want to take a few minutes, and hopefully I, like Ms. Baker, won't be encumbered by the 10-minute limitation, because unless there are detailed questions of the architect, Mr. Cowell, who is here with me, I will be the only speaker on behalf of the proponent. So just dealing for a moment then with livable Oakville, and you've had a discussion already both with staff and Ms. Baker around its provisions. It makes a very, very important provision for this site. And that is that it includes the property within a growth area boundary, the Kerr Village growth area boundary. And notwithstanding anything you've heard from Ms. Baker, this is part of the lower Kerr Village area. And the proper term is Village District. And this was one of 6 districts in the entire town where your council, you and your staff decided that it was a good idea for intensification and some more development to occur. And the reason you did that, I think, is well understood. But just for the benefit of the residents, the reason you did that is so as to preserve green space beyond the boundaries of the urban area, in order to preserve the character of existing residential neighborhoods, and also, obviously, to accommodate the growth that Oakville is seeing and will see over the coming 20 years. And so to suggest that a 4-story building in an area that's been identified in your plan is inappropriate for intensification, I must say takes me a little bit off guard. It was a plan, after all, adopted unanimously by this council without any appeals from the residents that are before you, and specifically provides a 4-story height limit with absolutely no direction as to density. So Ms. Baker's spoken about 50 and 100 units per hectare, I think she said. Well, none of those provisions are in your plan. This is an area where, subject to urban design considerations, you should be encouraging the very development that my client proposes. And in fact, I can tell you that the only reason this matter is even before you is because they and their advisors read Livable Oakville and its provisions for the site. And so just going back to the Kerr Village study, I note with some interest that it was only completed in 2009. And of course, it was undertaken by your planning staff with the assistance and input of many residents in the area, and of course of the area councillors at the time. And you had before you, I think, from Ms. Baker, a visual that suggested somehow that this is not indeed part of the growth area and the village district. And I'd like to suggest to you that that's an error. That in fact there was an ongoing process with the staff and with residents that added the Lower Kerr Village District to the study area and made it a part of the growth area boundary. And so here you see at the bottom of the page the 3 districts that were studied. And if I can just direct the council's attention to some of the language in the plan here, you will see that one of the reasons that this study was undertaken was to direct growth to identified locations where higher density, transit, and pedestrian-oriented development can be accommodated. And a reason for that as well is to preserve the character of the neighborhoods that are surrounding this area. So a focused, made in Oakville solution for growth. That's really what livable Oakville is. Not imposed by the province, not imposed by landowners, but a made in Oakville solution. And again, there was a suggestion, there was in fact an assertion by Ms. Baker that the lands are not part of this central business district and not within the growth area, at least a portion of them. And that is flat wrong. There may well be an error with some GIS mapping that the town has produced. But your staff have told you, and I would ask you to at least agree on the same set of facts. We can have opinions. We can't change the facts. The entire site is and has been since the Kerr planning exercise was undertaken, and in fact before that, within the central business district. And in fact, page 36 from the plan for Kerr Village describes the boundary of the area and shows it visually. You can see it at the top of the page. And it says that the boundary is, and I've highlighted the relevant section, is mid-block between Lakeshore Road and Burnett Street to the south. And the height range, as we've talked about, is 4 stories. And you can see that the line, the southern limit of the central business district, does not have the jog that Ms. Baker would suggest. That is page 36. And then moving through the document, again, there was a draft Schedule O put forward, which for our purposes is the same as the current official plan enacted by this council in 2009. And again from Livable Oakville, I've highlighted in the bottom right some of the language, some of the considerations that staff and residents and councillors brought to this planning exercise. All parties said that additional revitalization can mean focusing development in appropriate areas and a number of other things, including increasing population to support the local economy, providing amenities to increase population, etc. So good things for the town of Oakville from this kind of development. And just while I'm dealing with Livable Oakville, there's one other idea that has been expressed. I think it was Councillor Damoff who was inquiring of staff about the question of compatibility. And the proposition was put to staff that if we have 2-story buildings, how can a 4-story building be compatible with that? Well, firstly, the area is not just 2-story buildings. There is a 5-story project down the road, there are 3- and 4-story buildings in the area, and there are low-density houses, obviously, to the south. But having said that, compatibility has never meant, and does not mean, again in this made in Oakville design that we're speaking of, has never meant the same as. It means able to coexist without unacceptable adverse impact. And that's the definition we find on page F19 of the town's official plan. And I mentioned just briefly the area. These are just two examples of the kind of development that is within a block or two of the subject site. So in the top photo, if you're able to see, is a project that I understand is known as Windermere Manor. And this would be one block west on the north side of Lakeshore. This is under construction. It may be finished since I took this picture. And it's a 5-story building with, as I understand it, rooftop amenities. And in the same vein, I would draw council's attention to a project also approved by the town, by this council in 2009 at 42 Lakeshore Road West at the corner of Chisholm Street. And that is a property that has many of the exact same characteristics as the proposal before you. It's designated central business district. It fronts on Lakeshore Road. It has portions of its property as former remnant parcels that have addresses only on a side street. And it was approved in an area where the height limit is 4 stories, indeed at 5 stories, with the blessing of council and with the blessing of residents. And it was also approved with setbacks on 2 sides of 0, where 3 meters was required. And I remind you, council, that the proposal before you is to increase setbacks from 3 meters to 14 meters on one side and 6 meters on the other side, and to be 1 story lower. So I think, again, planning is not only about looking forward, it's about equity and fairness. And just as the residents say to you, they depend on certain things in the official plan, the owners here depend on certain things in the official plan. And they are not before you seeking an increase of an additional story, as that owner was. They are content to build the project in a modified form at 4 stories in height with a 14-meter setback on one side and 6 meters on another. And I say to you, that's an eminently reasonable proposal, given what we know about the area, the opinion of your staff, and what we see at 42 Lakeshore. And I can go through the chart, but I don't think I will, on 42 Lakeshore, but suffice to say, if there are any questions, those setbacks which I cited are exactly what was approved by this council without an OMB hearing, without appeals from neighbors. So at this juncture, maybe what I'll just do is review some of the submissions that Ms. Baker made briefly and then try and wrap up. I've spoken to you about her assertion that portions of the site are not in the central business district. I flatly reject that suggestion. It is not true. There is no amendment required. There is no, she made reference to Mr. Demchuk thinking there might be one in the future. That is not the case. She told you about in-force zoning regulations, and she went on and on about what they provided. We have a rezoning before us. The purpose of this planning exercise is to put forward a proposal and address the suitability of the proposal. The in-force zoning regulations predate livable Oakville. They predate the work that you did so vigorously in 2008 and 2009 on the Kerr Street study. You concluded, without any input from my client or anybody else, that 4 stories was the right number for this site. So it stands to reason that a rezoning application should come forward and be addressed on its merits. Ms. Baker went on to tell you that she feels, and her clients feel, that this proposal is out of keeping with the existing neighborhood. And again, I flatly reject that assertion. This proposal is completely consistent with what we see on Lakeshore Road. As you've heard, it's lower in height than at least 2 of the projects in the area, provides an excellent transition both to the south and to the east to abutting projects. And the shadow studies that she spoke of, firstly, We don't know what standard she thinks should apply. I can tell you that the town's own design standards speak about 5 hours of continuous sunlight. I didn't hear her say that that's not present in any of these situations. So I don't believe that shadowing is a concern you need to have, particularly given the character of the area and the efforts that have been made to step the building down to its south and to the east. She talked to you about concerns with retail viability. I suggest to you that's not a concern you need to worry about. That's something for the owner to worry about. The plan itself specifically provides for mixed use. That's what your plan says. That's what we would like to build. I think that should be the end of that consideration. We heard her say that her clients have some issues with traffic, I think were her words, some issues with traffic. She suggested there ought to have been a peer review. I suggest to you that we've put forward a report. If she has problems with the report and she thinks there are serious traffic concerns, I invite her to bring evidence on that point. I did not hear it from her. There's been some questions and discussions with staff last night around the rooftop amenity area. So I think maybe, and I think there were excellent responses provided by your staff, but perhaps you could spare me a moment just to reply and give you my thoughts. Firstly, a rooftop amenity area is exactly what it says. It's an amenity for the residents of the building. And if that isn't good planning, I don't know what is. The bylaw that's been recommended by your staff goes to great lengths to place that amenity area in the center of the building, away from the edges, with screening and other provisions that would be required through site plan and also through the zoning bylaw, and limits the area to 20%. It's not additional mass. You won't see anything up there unless you happen to see a barbecue or a trellis or a tree. By setting it back from the south and east sides, that and other measures through the detailed design can address privacy concerns. And I think, as the planning commissioner said, you're here to plan for existing and future residents. The future residents of that building deserve the option to have a barbecue on a roof. And I think that's really what we're talking about. Now, unless there are any other detailed questions, I think that sort of covers the things that I thought were important for you to know. I'm going to end my presentation at this point. And as I said, if you have questions that are of a more design-oriented fashion, then Mr. Cowell could come up and answer them.
Thank you very much for your information. I wonder if you would linger for a minute and consider some questions that
Certainly.
you've inspired in me. My first question is, I understand, I think I heard you say you're a professional planner, is that
Yes, sir, I am.
correct? So what zoning technically applies today?
There are two zone categories. I may get my nomenclature right, but there's a mixed-use CR zone category that applies.
I guess what I really mean is, does the existing zoning that hasn't been repealed or replaced yet still apply to the property?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Secondly, as a professional planner, how important should it be to us in considering the unique context of each application? So the question I'm concerned about is context an issue for us?
Context is always an issue on these matters, and so
Okay.
I couldn't agree with you more strongly, sir.
Okay. Now, we're used to people appearing before us and exercising their right to make the best possible case they can before us. But as a professional, would you agree that we have a duty to remember that we have to be careful about people's tendency to cherry pick in order to make their argument, and that we have to be mindful of the entire document?
Yes.
All right. Would you put that page 36 that I asked about back up?
That was in the livable, that was in the Kerr Village? Kerr Street plan, yes.
So now if I could just get our camera to zoom in on the top of the right column where it says height range. A little bit more focus. Here we go. So now the piece you highlighted there, would you read it, please?
Says height range. The height range in the central business district area is up to 4 stories, comma. It goes on to say with special exceptions in certain areas.
Okay. So as a professional planner, when you read that and you see the 2 words before the number 4, what does that tell you?
Suggests to me that 4 stories is a maximum figure.
Okay. So now finally, it seems to me that you might want to give us a more on-point response to the question of fit to the context of this site, or the issue that has been called overdevelopment a couple of times tonight, versus the reading that we've been given that stresses that there's permission for intensification. So on the one hand, we know that we give permission for intensification, but we work very hard in our plan to give context importance, as you said we should. Mm-hmm. So it would be more on point for us in your information for us to consider if you could help us set aside a worry, if anyone has it, that this is overdevelopment given the context here rather than elsewhere in the area. Do you want to take extra time to do that?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to do so. So the original scheme certainly provided for a greater amount of floor space than the current proposal. What happened was the 2 councillors in the ward, a number of the residents, aided by staff, said to us, we think you have a problem in how this project relates, in particular to the townhouse project to the east. We think it's just looms over that over that building. As you know, your worship and members of council, the setback from those townhouses on their property is only 6 meters. And when this project was originally conceived, we had also a 6-meter setback. And we had some discussion, I'll say, amongst the design team and with the client about what to do, because that's a site that would potentially be the subject of intensification in the future as well. So there were those who said, well, you know, that's really higher density development down the road. The purpose of grade 8 of stepping buildings down is to do it to lower density projects, single family development. We really don't need to do that. At the end of the day, the client, with our advice, decided to, in fact, increase the setback to 14 meters and redesign the project with that in mind. In addition, once the townhouses were removed from the scheme on its southern limit, we increased the setback from the required, I think the number is 1.2 or 1.8 meters in that order, to 6 meters. So in terms of a fit with the neighborhood, and then there's also the stepping on the south end from 3 to 4, from 2 to 3 to 4, if I recall correctly. Those measures, in my view, sir, successfully make this project fit with its neighbors.
So if, I'm just going to check and see if I understood you. Am I correct that you want us to look at this and say, they reduced the size of the thing, and therefore it now fits. And what I would, and I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
That is an
Or
important component
alternatively,
of my answer.
we reduced it enough so that now it fits, is another way of, I think, of hearing what you said. Is that right?
I don't know what the word enough. You have.
Well, it fits now in your submission.
In my submission, the submission of your staff, it fits.
Right. So what I'm interested in, and I'd love to hear you discuss this point, is I'm interested in what appears to be contained in your answer, which is you had a recognition that there was a fit issue, and you took steps to fit, right?
Yes, sir.
And what you've heard from the residents and Ms. Baker is that, in their view, it's not enough, that it still doesn't fit. Would you agree that that's a fair summary of their view?
Well, and I would take it one step further, sir. They are asking you to refuse this project outright. That was their request to you, to refuse the project, to say to this council, there isn't a project you ought to approve. Laterally, she said, maybe we could do 3 stories, we're not sure, but really what we want you to do is refuse the project. And so, notwithstanding the invitation from staff, the 2 area councilors, to the applicant to participate in a process whereby the applicant in good faith met with residents, had the architect do different plans, provide shadow studies, address grading issues, et cetera, notwithstanding all of that. Now, at this moment, we don't have a planner or an architect suggesting further changes to the scheme. We have former solicitor of the city of the town of Oakville saying to you, reject the proposal outright. And I just, that leaves me a bit cold, to be honest with you, sir.
Well, perhaps I could ask a different question. Would I be correct in assuming that you have no changes to offer to the proposal that you've put before us, and that you want us to consider the proposal as submitted?
I learned a long time ago not to negotiate with myself.
Okay. I just wanted to clear that
Yeah.
up. All right. Those are my questions. I found
Thank
them
you.
very helpful, and I thank you for
Thank
the
you very much,
candor
sir.
with which you addressed them.
Thank you.
Are there other members of council? Councillor Byrd.
Interested in the sequence. You submitted the first proposal.
Yes, sir.
Did you believe that that was in compliance with the wording of the Kerr Street study and, like you've said, all the other precedents and all that? So you designed this proposal, and then what happened? Like,
Well, we designed the proposal
and you said it was good planning
and
and
as a
submitted.
planner, the town requires a planner to write a report that says,
Right.
this is justified. I wrote that report, I said it was justified,
Right.
I stood behind it.
You stood, so are
And
you
so I
standing
still
behind
stand
plan number?
behind- I still stand behind
Plan
it.
number 1.
I certainly do, sir.
So and now you're saying, well, maybe we can stretch your opinion a little bit, and you can be the one we'll call it Plan 2, which is what here we tonight. As a planner, you say, well, I like Plan 1, but I can live with Plan 2?
Well, Plan
This is-
2 provides for greater separation.
Right. Is that
and
better
less-
planning or worse planning, in your opinion?
I think it represents better planning.
Right. And you're saying that's it, there's no Plan 3?
I haven't seen Plan 3.
Yeah, but you would have to present it to
But
your client.
we have to come up with something, right? Something has to come in.
Right. And so what you're saying, and the suggestion that we've got to pick between door number 1, which is now off the table, and door number 2, take it or leave it. And you're finding that offensive?
No, sir, not at all. I think the council has before it an excellent plan.
Right.
The one that increases setbacks on both important sides. And has all apartment building, and has a tiered, stepped approach on the south limit, and has all parking integral to the project, none outside, and provides for a good relationship to Lakeshore. I think all those things make it eminently supportable.
And it can't be improved upon.
I haven't heard an improvement. I'm open
No,
to
you're the
them.
planner. You're helping design this thing. And you're saying that this is conformity with the Kerr Street, the end zone, what the town's intent was. And now we see that's manifested in a building form that not
Right.
everybody is embracing. I guess you're so far, at this point in time, you're the only one that stood up and said, this is great.
No, I think there's some people over here who said
Okay,
the same
I'll
thing.
let it go at that. We have before us that either take it or leave it. Is that correct?
Counselor, we're recovering ground here, and really it's badgering, I think, so I'd ask you to hold off. It's normal to have an application and decide on it. I don't think we should impute anything to the delegation. Counselor Elgar?
Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight and speaking with us. A couple of things. You mentioned, and pardon? Pull it up to it. You mentioned protect green space beyond the urban area. What were you, what was your point of that comment?
Well, the macro approach to planning in Ontario and Halton Region and the town of Oakville these days is to rein in urban sprawl, to provide for at least 40% of the new growth in existing urban areas through intensification, so that we can still grow, still house all the new people who are coming to live in Oakville and everywhere else, but not do so by using up farmland. And so that's how this project fits into that macro approach.
What you mentioned was in the official plan. Where is that in our official plan that that you're saying we protect green space beyond the urban area?
Well, it's understood that by drawing the boundaries that you have, that you've done so.
Saying as far as from a planning point, no, I'm just trying to understand from a planning point of view. I've gone through the official plan. I don't see it in here. And I've just, because you referred to it was in the official plan,
Well,
I understand.
it's a sort of a top-down. So you'll find that the provincial documents, whether it's the growth plan, whether it's a provincial policy statement, have these objectives. And they then impose those requirements on local municipalities with those objectives in mind.
Well, it's not in the official plan.
I think it will be,
Compatibility,
sir.
when you talk about compatibility in our official plan,
Yes, sir.
I think you kind of tailed off, and I need your, understand, get your interpretation of what it means. The end of the sentence says, but can coexist with the surrounding area without unacceptable adverse impact.
Yes.
Do you
Unacceptable
believe,
undue.
after sitting here and listening to Ms. Baker, that there are no adverse impacts?
I absolutely do, sir.
So you, okay, that's your opinion.
I mean,
That's your
Ms.
feeling.
Baker
Okay,
worked on the 5-story building.
right. Next question, and final. Would you agree to 3 stories at this location?
No, sir.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor, I think. And thank you, sir, for your information.
Thank you.
You have no more listed. Are there other members of the public with information for council on this file at this time? I'm not seeing any, and so now I see one. I was about to restrict it to table. The next time I ask, that's where I'm headed, so everybody knows. Please come down and introduce yourself and share your information with council. And you're welcome.
Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen.
If you'll speak into the microphone, we'll have a chance to hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I live right in the area. I'm a little concerned about a lot of the effort being put into the technicalities and whether there are 2 words or 3 words before or after, and whether it's actually in the official plan or not. But here's how I see it. The neighborhood is one that's established and that people who live in that neighborhood love. What we're being asked to accept is, in the vast majority of the residents I've spoken to, unacceptable. It's too big, and the adverse effects are additional pollution from the 84 or so vehicles that are going to be parked there, additional traffic hazards that are going to result from that. We have large numbers of people always walking those streets because there are no sidewalks, and it's a very pleasant place to be. They come all the way from Holyrood to walk downtown along Brock Street. I used to run along there. Lots of people do. It's a wonderful place to walk down. So now we're going to increase the hazards. We're going to increase the waiting time. There's no way around it because we've got Lakewood as a dead end. We've got Brookfield as a dead end. And when one looks at the shadow, we're talking about the amenity on the roof not having any adverse effect on the neighbors to the east. That's hogwash. Of course it's going to be dreary and dull and grey in there. And this is just common sense. A whole group of vehicles in the morning, back again in the afternoon, on the weekends, is to us unacceptable. That's an adverse effect in a neighborhood that we cherish. Now, we've got a lot at stake here. The developer only has the dollar bills at stake. If I can build it this size, I understand that, and I'm all for profit. But the developer has, if I can build it as big as I can, no matter what the adverse effects are, I'll try and make it sound like there aren't any adverse effects. For example, the traffic studies that I saw were done way before these other densification projects had taken place. In other words, the one just west and on the north side, there's I think it's a 3 or 4 story building, yellow. Plus we have the townhouses or whatever they are opposite the school on Dorval. There's a huge amount of additional traffic that's coming from those, those projects that are presently being built. That traffic study that was presented with the original proposal is way out of date. It didn't take into account any of that additional building, which is truly substantial. There's a huge amount of additional densification taking place right in the neighborhood. And I think we're not against new buildings. We're not against densification. It's the way of the future. It's what we have to do. It doesn't fit there. It's too big for the site. It has too many adverse effects. And if it were up to me, I'd say build it 3 stories or leave. Somebody else will.
So, excuse
Just
me,
my
sir.
opinion.
I just need 2 more pieces of information from you.
Yes, sir.
Could we have your name?
Yes. Oh, sorry. I'm Paul Muser. I live at 230 Lakewood Drive. I live on the lake.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate your information tonight.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? I'm now restricting it to table. Council, you have a decision to make. You may have questions, and you may even have some debate. Councillor Duddick?
I have a proposed motion that I'd like to present on behalf of myself and my colleague, Councillor Demoff, if and when the others have exhausted their questions.
As you know, I think it's good to have a motion on the floor. So if you would bring your motion now, we can debate it.
I think the clerk will distribute for the benefit of the other members of council, but I'll read it in the interim, and I guess we'll put one on the viewer.
We'll even wait till it's there. How's that? I sense that's what you'd like to do.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's moved by myself, and even though we don't have seconders in planning and development, it was important to have my colleague on side because she's been an active participant, as you can imagine. That zoning bylaw amendment application Z1716.15 submitted by 822403 Ontario Incorporated be denied, as the proposal would be an overdevelopment of the site and would not be compatible with the existing neighborhood. And at the appropriate time, I would speak to it.
Councillor, now is the time.
Thank you. One of the cornerstones of our new official plan, Livable Oakville, is the protection of stable residential neighborhoods. The residents in the West Harbour area have always been active participants when it comes to planning. As a result of the previous redevelopment on the old Sharkey's property, the area mobilized to create a formal residents association known as the West Harbour Residents Association. That Sharkey's experience demonstrated to them the importance of being at the table when decisions are made, decisions that would have a direct impact on future development in their area. Since that time, they have donated their time, their effort, and even their personal funds to hire outside planning studies to assist them in responding to various developments, and specifically the issue of the C3 transition zone south of Lakeshore. In the early 1980s, the C3 zone changed to permit residential uses in addition to commercial uses. Since that time, huge changes began taking place in the area south of Lakeshore, and our zoning and official plan were in need of amending to reflect those changes. Residential uses replaced the old tannery buildings, the old federal furniture location, and Reimer's car wash, to name but a few. In 2005, Council directed planning staff to work on a study of the C3 transition zone in the West Harbour area, specifically the land south of Lakeshore, bounded by Forsyth in the east and the eastern side of Brock Street in the west. Brookfield was not incorporated in that study, so one would have assumed that the existing zoning was to remain unchanged. The West Harbour residents provided considerable input into the final document, OPA 269, that amended the C3 zoning in the area. Given the concerns with the impact commercial development might have on their residential neighborhood, they paid for outside planners to provide a planning opinion on the issue of C3 transition. I still have a copy of that document and have referred to it on several occasions, most recently through the redevelopment of the first capital site on Lakeshore. The CBD and the residential low-density designations utilize very different policies and approaches to development. Hence, there was a need for clarification of that zone. The report cites the objective for the West Harbour Residents Association as being to maintain the residential character of their neighborhood by emphasizing new residential development opportunities while limiting and controlling commercial forms of development. At the onset of the process, staff was asked to assess identified concerns from area residents with commercial uses in the C3 zone. The assessment was to address the following: analysis of existing land uses within the C3 zone, determine if there are designations that are more appropriate or zoning to recognize the built form of development within the zone, and determine impacts to the existing uses or abutting uses if the land use designation and zoning is altered. So given the time, effort, and money they put into OPA 269, is it any wonder they're frustrated and disappointed that they're being presented with an application that is contrary to the intent of the C3 transition study they participated in. At the onset of the process, residents remain confident that the application would not get favorable support from our planning staff, as the existing zoning on the two properties, 174 and 91 Brookfield, was for 7 townhouse dwellings, and 87 Brookfield would only permit single detached dwellings. They were also advised that due to this site being situated on the very edge of the central business district, special consideration would be given to provide them a buffer or transitional edge into the existing residential area. And it's interesting that you zeroed in on the very crux of it, saying that special exceptions in certain areas, and this is one of them. Section 13.2.6 of Livable Oakville speaks to this. Existing residential should be provided with maximum privacy for private living spaces, as well as adequate mitigation of impacts from commercial uses. And going on again to the one that's been referred to several times, section 11.1.9 provides further direction. Impacts on the adjacent properties shall be minimized in relation to grading, drainage, location of service areas, access and circulation, privacy, and microclimatic conditions such as shadowing. The first submission from the applicant was not well received by the community, as it proposed a 4-story building with 33 residential units on the 174 and 91 properties and 4 townhomes, replacing 1 home on 87 Brookfield. As a result of hearing the concerns of the community, the applicant attempted to provide another plan, the one before us now, a 22-meter high building comprised of 37 units. You will note there is no reduction in the number of units from the first to the second application, with terracing on one edge. A property that was previously zoned for 1 single dwelling will now have a 4-story building edge terraced downwards. Many of the concerns that were expressed from the beginning still exist with the revised application. Shadow, overlook, and privacy, height and density, grading concerns, traffic generated from the proposed development, and existing operational traffic issues with the Brookfield Lakeshore intersection and extent of commercial use. If the application in its current form is approved, the residents living in the townhomes abutting this site on the easterly edge, 98 Brock, would be faced with a huge building behind them, a building that will considerably decrease their enjoyment of their existing units as a result of shadow impact, loss of privacy, and yet even more traffic problems in an already traffic-restrained area. Currently, it is very difficult turning right out of Brookfield, let alone left, onto Lakeshore. What with 2 intersections and 2 commercial properties, Fortino's and Liquidation World, in the course of a single block, traffic leaves the area along Burnett and exits via Brock or Kerr Street. Not surprisingly, the applicant's traffic study indicated that the area can accommodate the additional traffic associated with the proposal and goes further to cite several developments that would have an impact. The traffic study failed to include 60 units at 103 and 109 Garden, 20 townhomes on Garden, 4 townhomes on Maurice, a proposal for 25 townhomes on Maurice wrapping around Rebecca, 33 units on Lakeshore and Maurice. When factoring their calculations for background traffic, if we suspect the traffic in the area cannot be accommodated, what options do we on council have to mitigate the traffic impact this development would have on the area? You already have 2 full signalized intersections, so you cannot introduce a further light at the corner of Brookfield. Of the 67 trees that are being affected on the site, only 10 are being saved, and only 2 of the 14 town-owned trees would be saved. It should be noted that the applicant is proposing to plant more trees along the landscaping edge, but with the shadowing associated with a 4+ story building, the plantings, not to mention the few existing trees, have a poor chance of survival. This site is a transitional area. It is not the core of the CBD. It is not 42 Lakeshore Road West. The transitional area is meant to buffer the residential area from the impact associated with commercial properties. We support the edge of our CBD as being the maximum, if we support the edge of our CBD as being the maximum height. What does that mean for the core area? You can be sure future developers will reference this area when they want to increase the 4-story maximum in the core area. After all, We permitted it on the edge. In terms of changing the property at 87 Brookfield to commercial use, other than the map and the OP, none of our planning documents in the Kerr area reference this area or recommended a change south of Lakeshore. In fact, all the other maps show the C3 boundary is remaining unchanged and ending at the edge of 91. In the course of our research, I could find no background studies supporting the change in the CBD. 2004 Retail and Commercial Review, no mention of Kerr other than Oaktown Plaza. 2006 Kerr Traffic Study, the 2009 plan for Kerr Village doesn't even refer to them other than the community improvement area that he referenced. It does refer to density taking place in specific areas, north of Spears and on certain nodes within the core area. The only vague reference I could find that might relate to this application was in our 2004 Kerr revitalization document. While it does not refer to this specific area, it refers to redevelopment concerns. For sensitive infill areas, a maximum height of 3 stories is recommended. And I would submit to you that the edge of a CBD is in fact a sensitive infill area. Contrary to what some people may think, the residents in the West Harbor area are well aware that development will occur on this site and possibly other sites within their immediate area. What they are asking for is a development that is compatible with their existing stable residential neighborhood. We submit that this application is not compatible for the reasons we've cited and those you've heard previously. Remember, they are not a neighborhood that's been silent throughout our various planning processes. They've been an active, engaged community willing to give their time, effort, and even money to ensure that any development in the area is in keeping with their vision of the area, as the C3 Transition Planning Report clearly articulated. The transitioning of commercial sites abutting residential areas should be treated with special consideration. I, for one, thought that was the intent of section 11.1.9 in our new OP, to provide us the tools we needed to buffer or transition future development adjacent to stable residential neighborhoods. The height, setback, shadow impact, and traffic associated with this development application does not meet the intent of what a transition area is, and as such, we respectfully ask for your support to deny this application.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Demoff?
I don't have an awful lot to add because no one can speak better than my colleague, Councillor Dudek, on this, but I would like to actually officially thank her for all of her efforts and all of the residents for their efforts. They've been professional and courteous. They've been very knowledgeable throughout this process. So I just want to extend thanks to them. And I concur with my colleague that we should be denying this application.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there other viewpoints to be expressed here by Council? I wonder if you'd permit me to say a couple of things on this matter. It's my view that the context here is unique and that it calls on us to reject this application, so I support the motion. The commercial intensity at this particular intersection is a hallmark of the unique context that we see here, as well as the edge nature of the area. I agree with my colleague that the existing traffic has not been adequately considered. In fact, I find no fault with her information that she's presented to us, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things like that. This is a well-known community in our town for their responsibility, the responsible way they approach issues, and the progressive way that they approach issues, and the highly engaged way that they approach issues with a lot of local consultation. And this is a council that respects that. And then my last remark on this is that transition control and impact avoidance are hallmarks and key values of this council and the council before this one that created the Livable Oakville Plan. And I'm confident that if we refuse this application, we will, I think, get a better result for our residents. We will certainly have no chance to get a better result for our residents if we do not reject it. And therefore, I join with the Ward 2 councillors in supporting the motion to deny this application. Councillor Byrd.
I appreciate, I'm going to certainly support Kathy, and Ralph will probably recall the number of hours that we have spent trying to, I guess, deal with this issue of compatibility. You mentioned, brought back the Mr. Lieboff and Federal Furniture. I remember the Venetian blind, I think, factory we had down there, General Dynamics, and putting together what we thought was compatible zone. I think it was called Mariners Cove, which was the transition of Foresight. Some people remember, but clearly council has had a history of trying to integrate, I guess, or good planning in this area and respecting the neighborhood and the residential character of the area. I think that was one of the reasons why there was so much pushback on surprise the interpretation of what could happen on the Sharkey's property. So we didn't have, and this comes back looking at it, and I'm sorry, Your Worship, with following through on to see if there was from this developer was something that we can embrace as being more compatible than what we have before you. Clearly, I can't support, certainly couldn't support option number 1, which was the first one, and I'm glad that was buried. And quite frankly, I do believe that this site here should have the same care and attention that we spent on the rezoning of to permit the I'll call it the Mariners Cove development. That's some 35 or 40 years ago, and that started the thing. But clearly, this is a key site. This is a transition site, and clearly we can do better. And I can't support this proposal. That's why, if it's take it or leave it, my decision is very clear. I'm going to leave it.
Thank you, Councillor Byrd. If there's no other speakers, Councillor Duddick?
Could I ask for a recorded vote at the appropriate time?
I believe you can, because I heard you before I heard Alan. All right, then it's time to vote, I guess. And if you are in favor of the motion to deny the application, please rise to be named. Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar, Mayor Burton, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Byrd, Councillor DeMoff, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor Johnston. That's, I'll call the negative vote, although I don't think there's anyone here to do it, but anyway, for the sake of the procedure. Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Council, that turns our attention now to item number 5, which is the 156-160 Trafalgar Road application. And I propose that we turn our attention, well, actually, let me just check. Are there members of the audience, by a show of hands, who need to leave now? Council, we'll take a 3-minute recess for an orderly clearing of the chamber so that then we can resume an orderly meeting. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will now resume the council meeting, having paused briefly to allow the public who wanted to leave. And we'll turn our attention to Lee Musson and welcome you to the podium, and fortify your vocal cords with a little water, and we will be all ears for your presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council. This evening, you'll find my staff report on page 141 of tonight's agenda. This is a recommendation report presented to you for a zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by Trafalgar Oaks Developments, Inc. for the development of a 4-story building containing 11 residential units with 22 parking spaces.
Excuse me, Lee. I think several of us are having trouble hearing you. If you could
I have a
address the
cold,
mic
sorry. Is that better?
closer, or, yes, much better, thank you.
Okay. The application was received on March 1st, 2013, and deemed complete on March 12th of 2013. There was a statutory public meeting on July the 2nd. Residents had issues, and they raised issues at that meeting with respect to height, massing, density, and traffic. Following that meeting, the applicant, the residents, staff, and the ward councillors met on September 5th and on January 8th to discuss the proposal further. Revisions were submitted in November of last year and again this year in January. It's my understanding, however, that residents still have concerns with the proposed development, and their comments have been included within the appendices. Excuse me. The site is located on the west side of Trafalgar Road between Dunn Street and Randall Street, and is municipally known as 156 and 160 Trafalgar Road. The property is approximately 0.09 hectares in size, with 29 meters of frontage on Trafalgar Road. In 2009, a 2-story commercial building located at 156 Trafalgar Road was demolished, and a residential dwelling located at 160 Trafalgar Road was also demolished, and the site is currently vacant. In terms of the site plan here, in March of 2013, the application before submitted to the town was for a 4-story, 13-unit building. In November, the application revised the proposal, reduced the number of units from 13 to 11, and in November and also in January of this year, the applicant had provided reductions in the height, and I'll get through those height reductions shortly. Access to the site is from Trafalgar Road. There is currently a 2.73 meter easement over the southerly portion of the subject lands in favor of this development, in favor of the development itself, sorry. And there's a corresponding easement over the northerly portion of 152 Trafalgar Road in favor of this development. And the easements are intended to be retained as part of this proposal. At grade, there are 2 parking spaces proposed within a garage and 4 covered parking spaces. There's a ramp located at the rear of the property, which will access an underground garage, which would accommodate 16 below-grade parking spaces. I just want to go through how the plan has revised since this was last before you. In March of 2013, the applicant proposed this 4-story building. It had an overall height of 16 meters. In November of last year, the overall height of the building was reduced by 0.71 meters, from 16 meters to 15.29 meters. Design also revised to remove some decorative chimneys. And then this past January, the height was further reduced, an additional 0.75 meters, from 15.29 meters to 14.54 meters, which is approximately a reduction of 1.5 over the original proposal. Now this colored rendering probably can show you more effectively, I suppose, the original proposal, which is ghosted in, and the new submission before you. It also gives you the context of the neighboring buildings to the north and south. I just want to go through a little bit more about what has changed with regards to this development. The pictures on the left side of the screen are the south elevation, and the pictures on the right side of the screen are the north elevation. This proposal is the original proposal. It shows the chimneys. It shows a continuous 16-meter height across the building. In November, the proposal was revised. The decorative chimneys have now been removed, which provides for a break in massing and a better transition to the heritage building to the north and the listed building to the south. A regulation has been included within the bylaw in front of you this evening that will ensure that the 4th floor is set back. The overall height, again, as I mentioned before, has dropped approximately 0.71 meters. In addition, there's an additional reduction in height at the rear of the building, adjacent to the Dunn Street residence. It went from 16 meters to 14.2 meters, which is about a 1.8 meter reduction. In January this year, the application was further revised. The building has now reduced in height from 12.29 meters to 14.54 meters. The height adjacent to the Dunn Street residence has remained the same at 14.2. However, the roof design has changed. Previously, it was sort of a boxy type design. Now it's proposed to be a mansard type roof, which will, in an effort to reduce the mass of the building. In this design, the fourth floor is located within the roof line, and the balcony on the fourth floor is actually set into the roof. And I have some more slides to illustrate that later. This is a cross-section that was prepared by the applicant. On the left side of the screen is the Dunn Street townhouses, which are a 3.5-story building with an overall height of 12.13 meters. And this cross-section shows the November proposal, but the drawing at the bottom is actually the proposal that's before council this evening. And this cross-section is quite helpful because it does show the relationship between the Dunn Street building and the proposed building. Now, to be perfectly honest and correct and fair to the Dunn Street residents, the Dunn Street building itself is actually on an angle to the proposed development. So there are some units on the Dunn Street property that are closer to this development, and there are some units that are further away. And it's my understanding from the applicant that this cross-section was taken through the middle of the building. One of the issues raised by the Dunn Street residents was overlook from the balconies. This slide shows how the applicant has tried to address that issue. The balconies are oriented to the south, but in order to stop overlook to the Dunn Street properties, the applicant has proposed a 6-foot, 6-inch stucco wall. Under the January revision, now we have the mansard type roof. You can see that the third floor is not, the fourth floor balcony is not visible as it's hidden into the roof. The second and third floor balconies continue to have a 6-foot, 6-inch stucco wall to mitigate the overlook. In terms of livable Oakville, the subject property is located within the downtown Oakville growth area, which is illustrated by the dashed line, and it is also designated a central business district which permits up to 4 stories. The applicant has not applied to amend the official plan. The area is currently evolving in that existing relatively underutilized built form will continue to transition with redevelopment opportunities. And the redevelopment within downtown Oakville is anticipated to include a mixed use, buildings, residential buildings, in a compact urban form up to 4 stories. The applicant is proposing an apartment building with 11 units. The livable Oakville plan does not provide a density maximum or a density limit within this designation, and the 4-story building would comply with the height requirements. The livable Oakville plan was developed to direct growth to our growth areas and to protect our stable neighborhoods. This is a growth area. And livable Oakville plan policies encourage intensification within our growth area in this form and height. However, in situations where there is intensification in the growth area is adjacent to a stable neighborhood, proposals are to be evaluated against section 11.1.9. And staff have evaluated this development against that policy, and the staff's opinion that it was found to maintain and protect the character of the area. It should be noted that site plan approval would be required for this development if it were to be approved. And through that process, further refinements of the building design can be evaluated, such as building materials, the landscaping, privacy elements, and elevations. A set of urban design and heritage requirements have been developed to ensure that the impacts are minimized. These urban design and heritage requirements are included within the appendices and form part of Recommendation 3. In terms of zoning of the lands are currently zoned C3R and R04. In the C3R zone, which is the more southerly property, permits a range of commercial uses, residential uses, including apartments. The R04 zone permits detached dwellings. The applicant is proposing to rezone the northern property from R04 to C3R. The proposed zoning before council is for a C3R zone subject to a site-specific if this application were to be approved. And I thought I'd like to take you through a bit of a zoning comparison if I can. I have a number of slides here, and what it will do will show you what is permitted under C3R zone, what is anticipated to be approved in our in-zone bylaw, and what the implementing bylaw is proposed. In terms of the front yard, the C3R zone currently permits 4 meters. The in zone, if it were to be approved, would allow a 0 meter setback or a 5 meter setback. The implementing bylaw before you this evening has a 2.5 meter setback to the main building and a 5 meter setback to the fourth floor. Heritage staff in their review of this application had noted that the proposed building setback allows for the Heritage home to the north to maintain its presence on Trafalgar Road. So the zoning for the front yard would be more restrictive than what the in-zone bylaw would allow if it was approved. In terms of the south yard, the side yard to the south, the existing and the in-zone bylaw would permit a 0 meter setback. The proposed bylaw in front of you this evening is more restrictive at a 3.2 meter setback. The side yard abutting a residential zone, which would be the north property, there's a 3 meter setback in the existing bylaw and in the in-zone. The bylaw before you this evening is for a 2.9 meter setback. Just as a point of clarification, the building itself is not set parallel with the lot line. The front corner of the building is set back 2.9 meters. The rear corner of the building is set back 3.46 meters. In terms of the rear yard, this would be the rear yard abutting the Dunn Street residence. The permitted in the existing bylaw and in the proposed in-zone bylaw is 3 meters. The bylaw in front of you this evening is for a 3 meter setback to the building and a 0.75 meter setback to the underground garage and ramp. Having this type of setback for an underground garage structure is not unusual in a downtown setting. The buffer strip in a C3R zone is 3 meters, and in the in zone will be 3 meters. The north side, the staff are proposing a 2.9 meter landscape buffer. Again, that's because the building is not parallel on the property. And then there's a rear yard buffer strip of 0 meters. Given that the underground ramp is set back 0.75 meters from the lot line, there's not much opportunity to landscape in that area. However, the urban design guidelines that are attached to the appendix to this report and form part of the recommendation, landscaping shall be provided in the rear, north, and front yards. And the thought is that through the site plan process, we'll look at opportunities for landscaping in the rear yard. In terms of parking, the existing bylaw requires 2 parking spaces per unit. In-zone would permit 1.5 parking spaces. This proposal complies. In fact, this proposal would have an excess of 5 parking spaces if in-zone was in place today. If in-zone was in place today, based on the 22 parking spaces they are providing, the applicant could have 14 units in this building. Staff are restricting the number of units to 11. In terms of height, the existing C3R zone allows a 10 meters tall building. The in-zone building has set an overall maximum height of 12 meters. The proposed bylaw sets the height at various points along the roof measured from the rear lot line. In rooftop mechanicals in the existing bylaw, there isn't a height restriction. In the in-zone bylaw, there's a 6 meter height restriction. The bylaw before you tonight would restrict the rooftop mechanicals to 1.4 meters. And lastly, the building height in terms of number of stories. Both the existing and the in-zone bylaw permits 3 stories. And the application or the zoning in front of you tonight would allow 4 if it were to be approved. Now this slide actually would help illustrate some of the heights, and I know because height is quite an issue with the residents. Under the in-zone bylaw, you can have a 12-story building, 3 stories, with a 6 meter tall mechanical. Under this proposal, the Trafalgar Gross proposal, a 4-story building will have a maximum height of 14.6 meters with a mechanical of 1.4 meters, giving an overall height of 16 meters, which is actually less by 2 meters than what in-zone would permit. What is actually also of interest is the setbacks for the mechanicals from the roof edge. The in-zone bylaw says that you should have your rooftop penthouse 5 meters setback from each roof edge. The bylaw before you this evening proposes a 5 meter setback from the north and the south roof edges, 4 meters from Trafalgar Road, and 13 meters from the rear roof edge adjacent to the Dunn Street residence. There are additional regulations within the bylaw before you this evening. One is the inclusion of a holding provision at the request of the region. The number of dwelling units have been restricted to 11. There are below-grade setbacks where the location of balconies are permitted and location of ground floor amenity areas. Staff's recommendation that this is appropriate to approve. A 4-story residential building is contemplated within the official plan. The addition of 11 residential units will not adversely impact the road system and will provide for a fully functioning development. It represents an appropriate form of intensification in this growth area, and a full circulation has been undertaken, and no outstanding concerns with respect to the zoning application have been identified by departments and outside agencies, subject to the inclusion of a holding provision. And the holding provision has been requested by the region of Halton to address the record of site condition and to receive an archaeological clearance from the ministry. Development will be subject to site plan approval if it were to be approved, and such items as screening, landscaping, facade treatments will be reviewed as part of that process. So staff are recommending that the zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Trafalgar Oaks be approved, and the bylaw 2014-026 be passed as revised that you received this evening, and that the site plan for the proposed development be undertaken in accordance with the urban design and heritage requirements attached as Appendix C, and that the no further notices required because the changes aren't necessary because the changes made. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Lee, for your presentation. Council, do you have questions? Councillor Giddings.
Thank you. Could you go back to the chart or the slide 17, the growth area boundary? Great, thanks. On the subject lands, it's a square box amidst a free-flowing dotted line. Is that a result of this application, or was that always the boundary line?
This property is within the central business district, so are you referring to the black line or the?
I'm just looking at the dotted free-flowing line that comes around from Dunn east over to Trafalgar, and it's now square around this lot. I'm just curious.
That's the growth area boundary.
So that's the actual area?
That's the actual growth area boundary.
And so one of the, is it the northern lots that's R04 and the southern one that's C3R?
That's correct. And both properties are within the central business district.
And you mentioned the 0 setback for the rear yard. You mentioned that it's not unusual in a downtown setting.
For an underground structure, for an underground garage structure.
So downtown would be more commercial, more applicable or suitable for commercial buildings, or?
Typically, a downtown area is a mixed use. You can have standalone residential, you can have standalone commercial, you can have a mix of both. We've seen zero lot lines for mixed use buildings in downtown. We often see 0 setbacks for underground structures.
And you mentioned that under in-zone, it's allowed a maximum 3 stories on this lot. That would be the new zoning.
The proposed zoning, yes, they're looking at a 3-story maximum.
And the minimum would be 2 stories.
Would be 2.
So either one of those 2 would be acceptable, either 2 stories or 3 stories.
That's what InZone's proposing, yes.
All right, thanks.
Council, any other questions? Councillor Demoff.
Can you go back to, I think it was slide 21? So between this one and the next slide, where you've shown the different heights, it's definitely, the overall height is higher than what InZone would allow. And we're back to this 6-meter rooftop mechanical again. But I don't think the intent of InZone was to replace overall height with, I mean, if you lower the amount of your rooftop mechanical that you're allowed to make up for it in overall height, that's not, I mean, that gives a fair amount of flexibility in your height, does it not? I'm a little confused why we're sort of saying it's okay because they've lowered the amount of the rooftop mechanical to, I think it's 3 meters.
I think the intent of this slide was to show if InZone was in place, what could be built on this site. There could be a 12-meter, 3-story building, and if they maximize the rooftop mechanicals, it could be 6 meters in height. And this slide was to compare what is before you. So what the applicant has is a 4-story building right now at 14.6 meters with a 1.4 meter mechanical, showing basically to illustrate that this building actually would be lower than if somebody came along and decided to maximize the 3 stories and the 6-meter rooftop mechanicals.
And when we had Paul presenting the last presentation, 6 meters is required because of the building code, is that correct?
I can't speak to the building code, but it is a maximum. When I was crafting this bylaw, I did speak with the applicant about their rooftop mechanicals and 1.4 meters, and they said that they could work with that. There isn't a rooftop terrace proposed in this situation, so it's not like they need to have access out onto the roof, and that might be why the rooftop mechanicals can be accommodated in a smaller height.
Okay, thank you.
So just to follow up, possibly the mayor was right about that in the previous item. It may appear here. Are there other questions? Councillor Elgar, did you indicate you had questions? All right. I guess I have a question. Lee, could you please go to slide 14? And okay, yes, that's the one I want. Now, you had another slide that I would also like to see. I believe it was earlier, and it gave the context for the property to the north and to the south of the proposed development. Could you also show that one? This one. So now, I'm going to ask you to go back to 14 in a second. But I'd like first to ask you to give me the height of the 2 neighboring buildings.
Through your worship, I don't actually have that height. I believe the applicant does, because they did a height study of the buildings in the area. I could ask Mr. Capper if he has that number for you.
So the one on the right is the northerly one?
That's the designated building, yes.
Okay. So for now, I guess it's enough to say that the proposal appears to be twice the height of the one to the south?
I can't calculate it, but it does look like it's larger, yes.
You know, in a general sense?
In a general sense.
And higher than the one to the north by 20%, say?
I'm not good with percentages, but it's about a story higher.
Okay. And now would you go to slide 14? So here we actually have height numbers, and what we see is 12.13 to the west, notionally the west,
Yes.
going up to, I guess it's 15.29?
14.54. The illustration on the bottom is what is the January revised application.
Also, I should substitute in the top picture, the picture in the bottom?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we go from 12.13 to 14.54.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So my question is, given that council has expressed for years now a great concern about feathering or transitioning, and in all the directions that we have information about height, we're going up. And I thought we all agreed that when you transition to a lower area, you step down. And so I'm looking for the explanation for how it is that we're doing any transitioning by going up in the middle of these lower edifices. And I believe the unshown side to the east is lower still. Would that be correct?
That's correct. I look at it as this particular proposal is within the growth area, is where we're looking to have our growth in our town. So I look at how you transition from the townhouses, from a 3 or 3.5-story townhouse to a 4-story building. That seems to me to be an appropriate transition. To the property to the east, or sorry, to the south, the listed designated building is unknown at this point in time what will happen to that building. It may get designated or it may not. It may be, an opportunity in the future for some intensification to take place on that property as well, given the fact it's not designated at this time. So my opinion is transitioning from a 3.5-story townhouse into a growth area, and why 1 to 4 stories would be appropriate.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're approaching the transition issue as an east-west issue, and you're going up a little bit from the non-growth area to the growth area. And so the result is, if I'm understanding you correctly, appropriate from the proposal down to the west, and we're achieving that height direction of going from high to low.
That's correct.
So that only leaves 3 other directions to be concerned about, and it's there that I get hung up looking for an explanation for how we're really giving respect to the neighboring, to the edge nature of this location. Do you have more for us on that?
When you look at the Heritage Building to the north, it's a 2.5-story building in essence. The way this building has been designed is it's been designed so that you have a mansard type roof, so the 4th story is built into the roof, so it doesn't look like a 4th story. I also look at it with the front of the building, the way it's been articulated. The 4th story is stepped back, which will break the mass of the building. So when you drive down Trafalgar Road, you'll see 3 stories because the 4th story is stepped back. So that's how I look at the transition to the north. When dealing with the property to the south, it's a listed building. There's a larger separation between the proposed building and that building, given that there's some easements there. It's unknown what will happen with that particular building, and it could be redeveloped in the future. I look at the transition towards across Trafalgar Road. I mean, Trafalgar Road is quite a large right-of-way, and I look at that as a separation in order to transition to those dwellings on the other side.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I'm actually very glad to have that. I might not agree with it, but I certainly understand it now, and I didn't before. So thank you very much for that. Any other questions from council? Then, Madam Clerk, do we have registered delegations?
Yes, our first registered delegation is Denise Baker, representing the Dunn Street residents.
Ms. Baker, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. I would suggest it might not be particularly surprising to see me back here again, because between this application and the application that we previously had, the number of similarities are quite extensive.
Thank you.
Sorry. So just putting on the screen, just so we get clear where we're coming from. I act on behalf of a number of residents in the area, including the residents in the Dunn Street townhouse area, as well as residents further down Dunn. We're seeking that the application for the 4-story 11-unit apartment building be refused for the following reasons. It's submitted, it does not conform to the official plan, particularly with respect to Section 1119 and the urban design policies found in Section 6. It does not respect the zoning regulations in either the existing in-force zoning bylaw or with respect to the proposed in-zone. And I want to take you to a number of regulations in the proposed in-zone that staff didn't take you to that speak to increased rear yard setbacks when there's increased heights, that speak to increased front yard setbacks when there's only residential dwellings at grade. So I'd like to just take you through those as well. Because there was some proposition that came much closer to conformity with the in-zone. Again, we submit there's no land use planning policy justification to approve the development over and above what staff is putting forward for you for approval in the in-zone. And in fact, We do understand that this area too, like the previous application, is actually subject to an area-specific zoning bylaw. And that wasn't brought to your attention either. But it is, and that limits the heights to 10 meters. We understand this modern day, as the in-zone does, that a height of 12 meters is probably appropriate. It reflects a modern floor height for the buildings that probably the consumer's looking for. We submit to you the development is entirely out of character with the existing neighborhood and is not compatible in terms of transition, height, size, and massing. And we also submit to you that the impacts on the abutting heritage resources, including a Part 4 designated property directly to the north, as well as the abutting Part 5 Heritage Conservation District to the east and to the north, which includes the Trafalgar Road right-of-way in front of this building, and as well the listed building to the south. And I will put forward for your consideration, just as a bit of a refresher, the town's heritage district mapping. Here's the property that we're talking about here. I just highlighted that. It's directly to the south of the Heritage Conservation District boundary. You'll note that the Heritage Conservation District boundary extends down Trafalgar Road, and you'll note the orange demarcation of the Part 4 Heritage District abutting to the north. You also have before you and here in attendance comments from the Trafalgar Chartwell Ratepayers Association for your consideration. And again, I just want to be very, very clear. This isn't a situation where my client's advocating for no development on the site. Instead, they believe that a development of an appropriate height, scale, and massing that respects the surrounding context is in fact entirely possible for this site. So I don't want to take much time on this. I don't think there's any dispute that livable Oakville in its current form designates these, and this is just the mapping from the staff report. It's not in color, but there's no dispute that these lands are designated CBD. But that designation, while an important factor when dealing with the intensification of the project, is certainly not the only factor. And I just turned to section 6.4.1, which states, in order to achieve compatibility between areas of different land uses, development, where applicable, will be designed to create an appropriate transition through the provision of roads, landscaping, spatial separation of land uses, and compatible built forms. And I just will say before I go on, the residents in this area have retained an independent expert land use planner who is not here to advocate before you, because I don't believe that that's their role. They're an independent planner, but have certainly provided me with some input and have fed into the comments that I'm bringing before you. We're submitting that the subject proposal does not create an appropriate transition through the provision of landscaping, spatial separation, and compatible built form. Interestingly enough, on those exercises, in all directions, the height of this building goes up. So when you're coming from the east over to the creek, while the explanation was it's going down from this property to the townhouses, that's right, but it's actually going up from across the Heritage District on east of Trafalgar Road. So it's going up and then back down. That's the exact same relationship when you go north and south on Trafalgar Road. So I would suggest to you that that's not an appropriate transition into a stable residential area. And again, section 11.1.9 of Livable Oakville is important for your consideration. Built form, compatibility of built form, compatibility with setbacks, orientation and separation, transition between land use designations and housing forms. A gradation in building height shall be used to achieve transition in height from adjacent development. Impacts shall be on the property shall be minimized in relation to grading, drainage, service areas, access, circulation, privacy, and as well the preservation and integration of heritage building structures and uses within a heritage conservation district shall be achieved. Based on the revised concept plan, Ms. Musson is right, there are some stepping in the building facade, but the overall scale, height, and massing of the proposed building is not compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods. And just again, for some perspective, Ms. Musson's right, in this particular area, there is no density calculation. But just for your reference, on a site that's 0.091 hectares with 11 units, the density is 120 units per hectare. Again, for contrast, the high-density residential range stated in livable Oakville is between 51 and 185 units. So again, we have a situation where we have effectively a high-density designation abutting a residential low-density designation. As well, Part E of Livable Oakville contains policies regarding downtown Oakville. And it says, while downtown Oakville is identified as a growth area, new development is to recognize and enhance the existing vibrant mix of commercial, residential, cultural, and institutions, which contribute to its unique heritage, character, and sense of place. So perhaps this proposed development is appropriate in other locations, but I submit to you it's not appropriate in downtown Oakville, which the plan clearly indicates is unique and not equal to other growth areas within the town. Also for your reference, 2544 of Livable Oakville states that downtown Oakville can accommodate an additional 80 residential units. And I just want to emphasize, that's 80 residential units over the lifetime of the plan. So that's to 2031. So here we're putting 14% of those 80 residential units right on the periphery of the central business district, where it would have the most impact on the low-density residential neighborhoods to the north, to the east, and to the stable residential neighborhood to the west, and a little bit to the south. But also, you're maxing out the site entirely as it abuts a Part 4 Heritage District building and the Part 5 Heritage Conservation District. And I just don't believe that the planning justification report or the Heritage Impact Assessment submitted respects those two matters. Quickly, just going to the zoning bylaw, I just want to bring to your attention here. As in the previous application, they're proposed to zone these lands C3R to implement that CBD designation. And again, here we have a situation, there's only two in the C3R area that are identified as needing special consideration. The one where the lands were in the previous application and on this site. And again, it's a maximum building height of 3 stories and no more than 10 meters above grade. And I just want to call to your attention on perhaps why that might be. If you take a look at this map here, with the red being the CBD, there are very, very, very few sites where the CBD directly abuts the stable residential neighborhood without there being an intervening designation or an intervening road, for example. The previous application was one of them, and here's another one. It's these sites here, these, and around here. Now, the yellow represents the stable residential neighborhood. You'll see where it is here, the transition is through a medium density residential over to the stable, and there is a high density residential component here as well. But everywhere else in here, and in fact when you go on the south side of Robinson Street, it has a medium density residential that abuts the low density in that transition. So this policy here, why it applies to the area in the previous application and the area in this application is because there are very few sites where there's this adjacency relationship. And I believe that there hasn't been anything in the planning justification report provided that would indicate why you should move away from that context and implement something that does not respect that. I'm just looking for my in zone. When we go to the in zone, Ms. Musson clearly articulates, again, the base in zone maximum height would be 15 meters, but again, that's subject to footnote 6, which is right here. Maximum number of stories shall be 3, and the maximum height should be 12 meters, and this is the February 7th version of this. Now, what's interesting, and I didn't necessarily appreciate at the outset, is if you look here, the minimum rear yard. So the minimum rear yard abutting a lot in a residential zone is 3 meters. Right? And the maximum height when you abut a lot is reduced to, a lot in a residential low density zone is 12 meters. But interestingly enough, the minimum rear yard here, it has a footnote 4 to it that says, the minimum yard shall be increased to 7.5 meters for that portion of a building greater than 13.5 meters in height. So that applies to those areas that are subject to the 15-meter height limit, but wouldn't apply, obviously, to the areas that are subject to the 12-meter height limit, because you wouldn't get to 13.5 meters. But here we have a situation where the applicant is getting the benefit of the increased height without having to have the obligations of the increased setbacks. Additionally, the front yard setback that Ms. Musson referred to, I'll just call your attention to the maximum front yard in the proposed livable Oakville. And the maximum front yard the minimum and maximum shall be 5 meters where a dwelling occupies the entire first story on a lot having frontage onto any public street other than Lakeshore Road, east and west, Kerr, Oak Park Boulevard, and Old Bronte Road. So when you have residential dwellings abutting on Trafalgar Road, your minimum and maximum front yard should be 5 meters. That's not what we see here. And so here we have a situation where we're entirely maxing out the yards. The rear yard setback in this, in terms of a landscape buffer, is proposed to be 0. So where this might contemplate that it should be 7.5, it's proposed to be 0. I would say that it's clear the existing zoning regulations, both in effect and proposed, would paint a different picture than the one that was put up that would suggest that perhaps it's equal. I would say to you that in fact we need to look at this application certainly much more closely. And I submit to you that there's no compelling reason to amend the existing or the future zoning bylaw heights and yards to accommodate this development. Quickly, with respect to heritage, a heritage comment on behalf of the owner of 164 Trafalgar Road was provided, and that's the owner of the Part 4 designated building. And I just wanted to say that that report opines that the new building will appear massively taller and longer than the heritage dwelling with only a minimal separation. The report states the dimensions, proportions, window size, and location and massing of the north wall of the proposed new building are in no way reflective of the Part 4 Heritage District and are certainly not sympathetic to it. As well, the Oakville Heritage Advisory Committee had concerns with the development, advised that the massing of the new building seems excessive, as well as the height given the context of the other heritage properties surrounding the subject lands. I submit to you one of the guiding principles in livable Oakville is to preserve, enhance, and protect the distinct character, cultural heritage, living environment, and sense of community of neighborhoods. One of livable Oakville's cultural heritage objectives is to ensure that all new development and site alteration conserves cultural heritage resources and areas of cultural heritage significance. With respect to trees, and this is important when you talk about taking away from a number of the setbacks. In regards to trees, the arborist report indicates that no trees on the subject lands will be preserved. A black walnut tree which straddles the northern property line is intended to be preserved. However, given its proximity to the building envelope, there is in fact some question as to its long-term viability. And it's submitted with the removal of all the trees on the subject lands, the provision of the required buffers and planting strips becomes all that more important. And I will also speak a little bit about the shadow study, or lack thereof. When a development project involves a mid-rise and tall buildings, additional issues might be addressed in urban design briefs, including shadowing and massing analysis. I submit to you this 4-story building is considered to be a mid-rise building where shadowing must be minimized and adjacent landowners should maintain their access to privacy, sky views, and natural light. To our knowledge, a shadow study was not provided, and therefore it's very difficult to understand if in fact those issues haven't indeed been addressed. The latest revision to the concept plan shows a building setback of 3 meters from the rear property line at the 2nd to 4th stories. And on the ground level, the first floor is set back approximately 3 meters at the north end. I understand around 6 meters in the middle and 0.75 at the south end, which is where the entrance to the parking garage is. It would be important for the applicant to provide a view analysis between the townhouse rear amenity areas and the west elevations of the building, given these given the reduced setbacks, certainly at the south end of the property. It's our submission that this matter should be refused in its current form. Issues such as landscape buffers, shadowing, setbacks, and overall height of the building have not been addressed. And it leads to the conclusion that the massing and height of the building must decrease and certain setbacks must increase. The subject lands are not typical of other properties in the CBD. The surrounding neighborhood context is unique. While livable Oakville permits up to 4 stories in the CBD, the subject lands are on the periphery and adjacent to heritage properties designated and zoned low-density residential. I submit to you this property is certainly not the appropriate site for the maximum 4 stories. The proposed redevelopment on the site has been maximized, and the site-specific regulations in the existing zoning bylaw and the new comprehensive zoning bylaw would specifically limit the height of the redevelopment of the subject lands, and we do not believe that there is any justification to deviate from these. I also reiterate the need to satisfy the policy in livable Oakville that requires an appropriate transition between areas with different land uses through the provision of compatible built form and appropriate spatial separation and landscaping. The existing zoning and the proposed zoning do address in these issues, and it need not be amended. Appropriate urban design measures could then complete the process through site plan for providing an appropriate development on the subject lands once you've achieved an appropriate building envelope through the zoning framework. And subject to your questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you for your submissions. I do have a couple of questions. And Councillor Giddings, I want to thank you. First, whatever you have on the projector there, don't take that away because I want to ask you about that in a second. But first, or rather, I guess I said that wrong. I want to come back to this, but I want to ask you to put that map back up where you had a wider view of the area and there was medium density and high density, this one. Mm-hmm. So now, I was with you until I noticed that the medium density and that you were referring to isn't in the CBD, it's in the residential area.
That's right.
And at that point, I became confused. So could you clarify what you're suggesting to us? Where should the transitioning be?
So what I'm suggesting to you is that there's very few, so with respect to, if I may put it back up, if I can find it. With respect to the area-specific zoning for the property, it applies to 2 very specific areas, and this one, Dunn, Church, Reynolds, and the rear lot lines of the properties on the south side of Sumner and Dunn Street. And I'm suggesting to you that the reason that area-specific zoning was put in place, and in fact continues to be respected in the in-zone, is because those are the areas, and there's not very many of them, but those are the areas where the CBD directly abuts the stable residential neighborhoods.
All right.
That's what the other examples were just examples of where the CBD does not directly abut it.
Okay, so do I understand you correctly that you're saying the answer to my question is this is different than that? These are not the same areas?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, that's helpful. Second, on the first document that I asked you to keep handy, on the other side, in number 6, I'd like us to read that together.
Sure.
Because I have a question around what is abutting and what is near, and you were using the term abutting, and I'm not sure we understand the word the same way. So in 6, would you read it?
Sure, it says the maximum number of stories shall be 3, and the maximum height shall be 12 meters where the lot is adjacent to another lot in any residential low RL zone.
Okay, so this lot, are you giving us to understand that you consider it to be adjacent to a lot in a residential low RL zone?
It is, yes. If you look at the in-zone mapping, so these are the subject lands, this lot here is RL 4.0.
Okay, all right, I find that helpful. So finally, do you recall the questions I asked of our planner about transitioning to the east, the west, south, and the north? Do you have a comment for me on this idea of transition, what I will call, she didn't, but I will call it, transitioning to possible future buildings that might be higher than what's there today?
Transitioning to possible future buildings.
What I took away from that discussion was that the property to the east might be lower now, but it could be higher later. And the property, I understood the suggestion, possibly erroneously, but I think I understood the suggestion to also extend southerly, that it might be more later. These were properties that are in the growth district, and therefore we might want to anticipate that they could be larger later, in which case then the direction would be coming down. Do you remember that discussion?
Well, I do remember that discussion. So looking at this, so that this property here, which is a listed property, might be higher in the future. And if the question is, sorry, this property here is a listed property, and if that was higher, I submit to you that it would likely then need an official plan amendment, because we're putting the maximum on this property. So if it were to be higher going into the core, I'm not necessarily convinced that that's a bad idea, that you go higher into the core. But when you're starting above the maximum, going higher into the core would require an official plan amendment. And I think that's part of the problem, is if we're putting the maximum at the periphery, what are we doing at the core?
So do I understand you to be saying that if we observe our OP and the property to the south were the maximum of 4, then the proposed property might logically be 3 or some other number that is lower than 4?
I absolutely agree with that, because I think you transition down into the stable residential neighborhood.
And would you be making the same suggestion, therefore, with regard to the property to the east?
The property to the east, I think, is a little bit more difficult, because the property to the east abuts a stable residential neighborhood as well. So I think you would need to have the same considerations with respect to those adjacencies. So necessarily going up, I don't think is in fact the direction that good planning would want to go. But certainly, I think you'd have to be mindful of the adjacencies with the stable residential neighborhood, and I think that's why the in-zone is very specific as to say when you're in the CBD and you abut a residential low density, you have the height of 3 stories and maxed out at 12 meters.
Okay. Okay, so there's a clear distinction between your comments on this and our planner's comments on this then?
There are, yeah.
Okay.
And the planner who fed into the comments with respect to this application on behalf of the residents.
Okay. Those are my questions. Councillor Giddings, and thank you for the answers.
Thank you. Ms. Baker, you mentioned that the current zoning is 10 meters and that with current expectations, perhaps a 12-meter height could be appropriate?
Well, that's what's reflected in the in-zone, and I don't necessarily disagree with the appropriateness of what's proposed in the in-zone.
The adjacent houses on Dunn Street, what is their height? Are you aware?
The towns?
The towns, yes.
They're just, I think they're 12.1.
12-ish? All right, thank you for that. And you mentioned the 3-meter setback, and that there are various setbacks at ground level. At 2 to 3 stories, it's 3 meters, and at ground level, there are variances. What leads to that?
I think it's, the applicant's probably in a better position to understand that, but When you come around the back of the building, there's the driveway down into the parking, so that portion, that drive aisle directly abuts the property line. The middle of the building where that driveway ends, my understanding is it goes back because the driveway is 5.5 meters. So the building would then be about 6 meters back from there. And then at the very north end, it goes down to 3 meters because I understand that there's some stairwell.
And the difference when
the
you're up
building.
2 to 3 stories, is that a result of the balconies that?
No, my understanding that's the building face because there are no balconies at that rear elevation.
Great, thank you.
I would say, though, that the minimum rear yard landscape buffering proposed in the zoning bylaw is 0, irrespective of where the building is, with the articulation.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there other questions? Thank you, Ms. Baker, for your information. Now, are there other registered delegations? Ruth Victor. Welcome, Ruth. Long time no see. Welcome back. We look forward to your information.
Thank you. I'm here tonight on behalf of 164 Trafalgar Road.
Ruth, would you be here in front of the microphone?
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm here tonight on behalf of 164 Trafalgar Road. That's KDA, and that's Incorporated owns that property, and that is the Part 4 heritage designated house that was referred to in the previous presentation. In terms of my presentation to Council today, I'm going to stay distinctly focused on the question of heritage conservation and the interface and the transition of this proposed development with the designated heritage home. The provincial policy statement sets out the requirement that development and site alteration may be permitted on adjacent lands to a protected heritage property where the proposed development and site alteration has been evaluated and it has been demonstrated that heritage attributes of the protected heritage property will be conserved. The Livable Oakville Plan specifically talks to the issue of heritage conservation in a number of components, but I'd like to direct you to Section 25(2)(3)(b) that requires development to not only be compatible, but also complementary with adjacent residential neighborhoods, cultural heritage resources, and cultural heritage landscapes. So the test that we're looking at in terms of this application is not simply compatibility, but complementary. It has to work well. It has to work in the context of the heritage resource that way the municipality has already identified deserves protection. What is fairly important to understand is that the heritage resource is located, the built form is located on the property line. There is no setback between the existing designated heritage home and the lot line. All of the transition, all of the mitigation that has to occur on the development site. And that becomes fairly important when you consider that the design of the built form does have terracing from the front to the property. There is a setback. There is some additional consideration of the height to the rear. But directly adjacent to this property, the building is 4 stories in height with no terracing and very little articulation and definition. We, within our comments that started on page 175 of the agenda package, set out those issues in detail. I won't review them now. I know Council would have had the opportunity to review them. But just to summarize, our concerns are height. They are setbacks. They are the lack of terracing between the heritage resource that would have, and the new building that would have assisted in the mitigation. There's concerns regarding the opportunity to protect the existing vegetation, the mature vegetation. That's an urban design objective. There's a fairly limited setback within that area. We're concerned that that may not be achieved. So in terms of the overall consideration of this, we have twice tried to meet with the applicant, go through with our concerns face-to-face with them, identify the issues as soon as the heritage impact study was brought out. We have offered the use of a heritage architect in order to sit down and discuss these with these, but have not had a response from the applicant and have not had the opportunity to see any revisions to the plans to distinctly address the heritage issues. Planning staff have been sensitive to some of the issues that we have raised, and in part have removed the potential for amenity space in the side yard. Originally, there were doors and exits to that side yard. Planning staff have removed that opportunity through the zoning bylaw, and that is appreciated. But in terms of the built form and the transition and the appropriate setbacks, it's our opinion that these issues are in fact zoning issues and need to be regulated as part of the zoning bylaw. And at this point in time, they have not been satisfactorily addressed, and the application would be considered to us premature until they are.
Thank you very much for your information. Let me just see if there are questions for you. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Councillor Bird has thought better of that. He's got a question.
I'm intrigued by that. Can you have an example of where, I guess we'll call it use of amenity space on one property is encumbered by an agreement with another property? I don't know legally whether you can do that.
No, basically what we did is the original drawings that were provided back in November had doors that exited out into the side yard area. That area had the potential to be utilized as designated outdoor amenity space.
Right.
Within the zoning provisions, it does not permit the use of the side yard area. It designates it as a landscaping area, and it's not to be used as amenity space. So it provides a use for it.
And where, I've never heard of one property owner having that kind of encumbrance on another property as far as use of a side yard with regards to amenity space. And that's what I'm having. Is it something because it's a part for designated property that you can get those sort of conditions?
The concern is that we have 10 feet between the two walls.
Right.
We have a 4-story building on one side, we have a 2.5-story on the other side, and the concern was if somebody directly in this very narrow canyon between the two buildings used it as an outdoor amenity space, whether it be for whatever activities in there, and that there should be designated balconies and other amenity spaces provided for each of the units. So that's why we had identified that to planning staff, and it has been included within the provisions of the bylaw.
Okay, you made that, I don't want to belabor it, but I've never seen that. I don't know how that would work, how it would be enforced, how you'd put on title that you've got a side yard here, but you can't use it for anything else than landscaping or any kind of amenity, or what would that, because the abutting property owner feels that it would encumber their enjoyment or enhancement of their property.
If I may, it's set out within the bylaw as provision XVIII.
Okay. And you're saying that has to be clarified?
No, I'm not saying that has to be clarified. I was just identifying that staff has in part tried to respond to some of the issues that we had raised, and I was just commenting that we appreciated that, but in terms of addressing some of the concerns, but we do not believe that the breadth of the heritage issues regarding built form and compatibility and appropriate transition have been addressed.
Thank you.
I'm glad you had the chance to clarify that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any more? David Capper. Welcome back, David. Long time no see. We look forward to your information.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. If I could just ask our colleagues up in the IT department to switch me over to the desktop. I have prepared a presentation for council, and I'd just like to get that on the desktop.
We can switch you over to the desktop, and
Thank you very much.
I know you know your way around the machine.
This machine doesn't like me very much. You'll have to forgive me.
I've seen it be bulky with others, so don't take it personally. And help is on the way right behind you.
Wonderful.
I think he wants to load a different PowerPoint.
Okay, I can.
There
Awesome.
we go.
Thank you.
Okay, you're away.
Thank you, Your Worship. Members of Council, my name is David Capper. I'm here with Weston Consulting on behalf of our clients, Trafalgar Oaks Developments, and they're the proponents for the application this evening. I'm going to be joined halfway through my presentation by Mr. Bill Hicks. Mr. Bill Hicks is the architect for the project, and Mr. Hicks is going to be discussing not only the design and architectural matters, but also potentially addressing some of the heritage issues as well. Just very quickly, I think there's a number of pieces of information that are particularly important to the discussion that's happened this evening as it relates to that compatibility and context question. I need to point out a couple of things that the previous presentations haven't pointed out, and I think that they're going to frame the discussion as we move forward. First of all, as it relates to the Dunn Street residence. This is a development which was approved some time ago. It includes 6 townhouse units on a site that is 0.12 hectares in size. For reference, that is a residential density of 50 units per hectare. Under your official plan policies, that density falls within the medium density residential designation. Further to the north, you have the property that I'll refer to as the Day property. That property is definitely a designated property. It is probably best described as a mixed-use building. It has, as far as I'm aware, 8 residential apartment units, as well as ground floor office uses. The site area for that particular property is, as I understand it, 0.106 hectares. And if you run the numbers, that works out to a residential density of 75 units per hectare. The density range for the residential high density range within the livable Oakville plan is between 51 and 185 units. And as Mr. Denise Baker had pointed out, our development comes in at a density of, she had suggested 120, I'm going to suggest 119, but we'll agree that there's a rounding error there. So I think what Council has before them this evening is a very strong written staff report. I think the recommendation coming from the Planning Department has been well thought out. I think the recommendation is very solid, and I believe that the application in front of you is a result of significant public consultation on behalf of not only the Planning Department, but ourselves as well. Our original application sought 13 units. We had an ultimate building height of 16 meters. And we sought amendments for increased building height, decreased parking ratios, reduced rear yard setbacks to the underground parking rank, and reduced front yard setbacks. We've had numerous meetings with the residents in the area. We've met numerous times as with a group, also with individuals and their representatives. We've revised our application now 3 times. We are coming forward responding to the submission that our building was too high, that there were perceived impacts with respect to lack of privacy and overview. The parking relief that was being sought was too great and would impact on-street parking in the area. The density or the intensity of the use was too great for the neighborhood, and that the preferred build form was a townhouse development. In response to that, we've reduced the maximum number of dwelling units to 11 units. And there's a little bit of overlap between my presentation and Lee's, so I'll just skip over a couple of slides. But a very similar zoning analysis with respect to what's permitted in the C3R zone currently, which is the in-force and effect zoning bylaw. I think what has happened and is happening is there is a transition. You've got the C3R zoning bylaw under the 1984 bylaw. You've got your livable Oakville plan. You've now got your in-zone, your new zoning bylaw, which is informing land use planning with respect to your livable Oakville plan. I think it's particularly important to point out as well that with respect to the comments that are being raised by Ms. Baker, and specifically referencing her client's concerns with respect to the height limit, The in-zone bylaw zones that property as RM2, which is the residential medium density 2 zone. In the absence of the day property, which I'll address in just a minute, in the absence of that property being there, the 12-meter height limit would not apply. And in fact, it would be the 15-meter height limit, which is proposed for those properties that are located, I'll call it, in the interior of the central business district. So you have a residential medium density use by density, you have a residential medium density use by zone, and arguably by built form. You've got I will call it a 4-story, others may say a 3.5 or a 3-story townhouse built form, but you've got a 4-story building immediately adjacent to the proposed 4-story building. Building heights are higher for our project. The transition is from 12.13 meters to 14.52 at its highest point. There is a transition in building height, and certainly Mr. Hicks will speak to that. As it relates to Mr. Day's property, the proposed in-zone bylaw, and if I could ask our colleagues just to flip to the overhead projector. So this is from the latest draft released on Friday of the new in-zone property. Now keep in mind that the Day property has 9 residential units as well as ground floor office commercial type uses within what looks like a single detached dwelling. Within an RL4 zone, which is what the in-zone zoning bylaw proposes to zone that property, it shows it as an RL4 zone with a special provision. And the special provision permits multiple attached units and then other uses specific to the office component. If I can refer you to, and keep in mind, the only permitted use, built form and use permitted in any of the RL zones, at least RL 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, is a single detached dwelling, or sorry, a detached dwelling as it's defined in the bylaw. In terms of a definition for the bylaw, a detached dwelling means a separate residential building designed to be one dwelling unit. I would suggest to you, council, that the Day property is not a detached dwelling. Rather, I would suggest to you that it meets the provision for a dwelling apartment, in that is a dwelling unit within a building containing 3 or more dwelling units, where the units are connected by a common corridor or vestibule. That is the exact situation that you have in the Day property. I would suggest to you that it may be inappropriate to zone that property as an RL zone, and it's probably more appropriate to zone it in the new bylaw as an RM zone, which, notwithstanding its built form, which is a heritage building, and we know how hard it is to get changes to a heritage building, but from a use perspective, it functions as a residential medium density, again, from an official plan perspective at a density, which is aligned with the medium density residential, and at a zone, which from a use perspective is defined as a use that would be contemplated in the residential medium density zone. And I've just highlighted that an apartment building is only a permitted use within the RM4 and the RH zone. So why is that relevant? Well, it's extremely relevant because if you apply a zoning category that is more appropriate for the Day property, given the way it is currently being used and the way it currently functions, albeit in a legal non-conforming situation, the more appropriate zoning designation would define these 2 properties as that transition into the CBD. Therefore, our client's property wouldn't be penalized for being at the edge where it's being adjacent to what is arguably not a residential low-density use. It's a residential medium-density use. So I think when we talk about transition, when we talk about context, when we talk about compatibility, we need to keep that in mind, that these are not single detached dwellings. These are not the areas where you should be, let me correct myself, you should be sensitive in terms of how you're designing these buildings. adjacent to, any development adjacent to these buildings. But I believe that these two properties that provided an appropriate transition from the single detached dwellings to the north into the central business district. I think beyond the central business district, you're going to see infill. I think you're going to see development, and I think you want to encourage it at 4 stories. This is the area of the town where you want to see that intensification occurring, but you want it done sensitively. And I think that's an absolute key. I've gone a little bit over my time limit. I want to conclude very quickly by saying that it's my opinion that the project implements council's visions as expressed in the new Livable Oakville plan. I believe the application is consistent with the direction that you're going with your new in-zone zoning bylaw. I believe that as downtown Oakville is one of the areas of the town of Oakville where growth and intensification are encouraged, I'm of the opinion that the application represents good planning as it encourages infill intensification on an underutilized site and does so, in my opinion, in a sensitive manner. And finally, I look forward to your support on the application. Having said that, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Hicks. I do, if you had further questions with respect to the building height on the adjacent property, I do have a survey of building heights.
Mr. Kemper, I always look forward to hearing from Mr. Hicks, but before we do, I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
And if you could return to the microphone, it would assist me in hearing your answer.
I was hoping to get away.
I want to go back to your discussion of the day property, as you call it. And you gave us some free advice that it ought to be RM and not RL. And you told us that that would be relevant here because if it were RM, some of the issues that have been raised against you would fall away. Am I right in my summary?
I'll agree with that, yes.
Okay. So inherent in your free advice was that we zone for the use we find there rather than the form we find there. Am I right about that as well?
Through you, Your Worship, the comment was that the existing use of the property doesn't comply with the definition that's being provided in the in-zone project.
Right, so I take you to be saying that we should have the use trump the form in terms of the zoning we apply.
I wouldn't say trump. I think it's an accurate representation of what is occurring on the property.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we have our basics and we agree on the basics. So now, as a professional planner, what is your advice to us if what council wants to happen there is for the future to evolve so that it keeps that form and what we regard as a grandfathered aberration, a grandfathered use, would disappear. If we wanted to keep that single detached form that we all agree we observe there and lose that RM-like use, what then should we do when we do the zoning under in-zone?
You'll have to forgive me. You lost me a little bit towards the end of the, sorry, you lost me a little bit towards the end of the question.
We have a situation which you bring to our attention that the form says, you know, we're trying to treat a form that looks like single detached as single detached, and you observe that it has apartments inside it, and therefore there's a use at variance to the apparent form. And you recommend to us that we zone it RM, not RL, as we are intending. And I'm asking you for your advice. What if where we want to wind up as a result of future development in the town is that that would remain or become single family and we would lose the apartment over time? Like, would we go to RM or would we stick to RL?
There's that opportunity available to you as well. Yes, there's certainly the opportunity for the property to revert back to its original use as a single detached dwelling. I can tell you from my experience, it's not often that that a property is, for lack of a better term, down-developed. Usually you see the exact opposite occurring, whereby properties are intensified, whereby uses are either legally or illegally stretched. And there's oftentimes, obviously due to the economic incentive, there's intensification in the use that occurs.
Okay, but thank you for your answer. It does help us better consider your free advice on the question. Mr. Hicks.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to your information.
Excuse me while I grab some water. Your Worship and members, I'm losing my voice here a bit tonight, but I will come back to the microphone. There's been a lot said about a number of different things. I'm not going to reiterate some of the changes that we've made throughout the process. I think we've heard about a lot of those, but we have been hearing a number of things about what seem to be some of the major concerns, and that relates to, is it truly a transition? How do we transition between the adjacent properties, and what's its impact on some of the heritage things? So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to reiterate how we've gone through a number of the changes. As I've said, I just want to start with the site plan just for reference sake again. And I think we all know how it's working, but there was a comment made with respect to tree preservation. I am showing that there are trees preserved along the street right away. There is a tree preserved here. Our arborist believes that that tree can be preserved. There is an indication that perhaps it might not be preserved. That's not our opinion that it cannot be preserved. So we actually believe that we've maintained a fairly good canopy along the property, and we can introduce additional landscaping on the back of the property. When it comes to the actual main floor plan itself, just because some were asking questions about how the setback varies at the back of the building, this is the townhouse site at the top of that property. This is the Rick Day property on this side. And what you'll see is that the actual building setback occurs at this line for the second, third, fourth story. And only the ramp section itself actually comes close to the property line. And then the amenity area for the lower unit on the main floor actually steps back further. So that's why you see a setback change between 3 meters and 6 meters and slightly smaller dimensions at the edge of the ramp. So I want to talk a little bit about transition. This, as we've talked about before, is the amended elevation, where we have in fact, we've reduced the height, we've reduced the balconies, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at the allowable, some of the things that we've tried to do to deal with transition, and I'll clarify this with respect to the townhouses as well. We talk about the building to the north being a 2.5-story building. It's a 3-story building. It's occupied on the 3rd floor. So we talk about the townhouses to the west being a 3.5-story building. I designed the townhouses. They are 4-story buildings. They're not 3.5-story buildings. They have occupied space on the 4th floor. It's simply not called a 4th floor because of an anomaly in the building code that doesn't require you to call it a 4th floor. So in terms of transition, some of the things that we've tried to do, if you look at the Rick Day property, we've actually set back the upper floor of the building, and the cornice line at that point is in fact right in line with the top of the roof of the Rick Day property. We think that's an appropriate response. And one of the issues that has been raised was that there hasn't been an appropriate study of the property related to its impact on heritage. We did actually retain Mr. Temporelli, who's done a great deal of heritage work for the town. He came forward to us with a number of good recommendations. Some of those did relate to the very thing that I've just talked about, where we pushed back the 4th floor. And in fact, he's been quite satisfied that we have appropriately reacted and responded to the heritage structure to the north. Now, obviously, Ms. Victor has and their clients have retained yet another heritage architect. I've received and reviewed that study. It's my understanding that there's about 9 recommendations within there, which I think the members have had the chance to read. we think that 6 or 7 of those can easily be dealt with through the site plan review and approval process. We can't deal with the reduction of a story in the building, and we will agree to disagree with that. But now I've got 2 heritage architects who are both disagreeing with each other, and I'm sure if I hired another 3 or 4, they'd probably all disagree with each other as well. So we went to Alex because he's done so much work for the town, and we feel that and we spent quite a bit of time in working with him to make this whole proposal work. So in terms of the, I'll refer back to this plan, which was shown in one of the earlier presentations, showing the proposed building here and the townhouses. And the one section that you looked at before, someone had said it wasn't true in terms of its relationship because of the building of the townhouses are in fact on an angle. This does show they are 4 stories in height. There's a 2-meter difference in height between the top of the townhouses and the top of our structure. I consider that to be quite minor, given that they're some 30 to 35 feet away at the closest point. Certainly architecturally, I would consider that to be negligible, and I don't think most people will even recognize that a 5 to 6 foot difference from that separation distance. We have gone a long way in terms of trying to reduce the height of the building. There was a comment raised with respect to the bylaw that the setback should be increased as one gets higher, according to the new bylaw that's proposed. And I think that said that anything above a certain height of 12 meters, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have that document here, should be set back 7.5 meters. The only portion of our building that doesn't meet that bylaw is that little wee corner of it right there. So are we higher than 12 meters? Yes, we are. Can we, if you look at this drawing, the 10-meter height requirement that's set out in the existing bylaw is basically at that level, plus or minus a foot or 8 inches or so. The 12-meter that's allowed is right here. The only portion of our roof that's actually exceeding what's actually permitted in the new zoning bylaw is this portion of the roof. Now, it could be argued, and we've actually looked at it, I can put a flat roof on the entire building and probably get rid of another meter of height on the building itself. My job as an architect and working with the heritage architects is to try and impart some sort of architectural character to this building that is appropriate and that does work with the existing architecture and the adjacent pieces of architecture. So that's why we've elected to use the mansard roof detail on there. And that's why its attempt is to say, at the main cornice line, we're 3 stories high, and then we step back from that point. So in fact, that portion of the building, if you look at the 4th floor, actually steps back about, I've got that plan right here. So as you get from the street at Trafalgar and you get up to the 4th floor, it's actually set back substantially further than what's there, and you'll see the Rick Day house in that location. So we think that, I guess there's a few other issues raised. There's a number of things saying the height is too high, the scale and massing is inappropriate. I'm not quite sure, I haven't heard any evidence as to why that is, and this isn't maybe the forum to present all of that. We feel that it has preserved some existing trees. It does deal with the landscape issues. We believe that, and our heritage architect who has done extensive work on this, does believe that it is an appropriate building in relation to the building to the north. And in fact, it's been presented to Heritage Oakville, and they have not raised any objections to it. They gave some suggestions, and we've tried to incorporate some of those suggestions. So even the town itself is saying that it appears to meet that. We've talked about the density. The shadow diagrams, which we said are surprisingly missing. I do many of these for different projects. And to be honest, we go back to this one. North is effectively here. I'll call it Oakville North because everything's at a 45-degree angle. South is here in terms of its impact on the residential properties. On Dunn Street, it will be minimal. I know that if I do a full shadow diagram, I will probably cast some shadows on their property at 8 o'clock in the morning, but I would suspect that the trees on the property probably cast the same shadow. In terms of, and the sun's rising here, the sun's setting here, so I haven't done a full shadow diagram because I've done so many of them, and I know the results and impact of it will actually be minimal. Certainly nowhere near what you saw in the previous application that we saw before us tonight. So what I really wanted to, as I say, in final discussion, in my opinion, the transition of going from what I'll call the Rick Day building as 3 stories, not 2.5 stories, to our building at 4 stories, and from the Dunn Street townhomes at 4 stories, not 3 stories, they're 4 stories high, which is about a 2-meter difference in height, and we have set back our building so that it in fact matches the roof of the Rick Day building. My professional opinion as an architect, that is an appropriate transition. I think it's a very simple transition. It's a respectful transition. If you look at the property to the south, which falls in the central business district, which does fall in a property that will most likely be developed, I don't think we're talking about transition between properties within the central business district itself. So our transition has to react to the 2 properties that are adjacent to it, and as someone has mentioned, perhaps the ones across the Trafalgar Road. But again, there's a great deal of distance between those properties, so we don't think that that's one that has to deal with the transition. And again, it falls within the district. So we feel that a 1-story change in height from the building to the north and effectively less than half a story change in height from the townhouses is in fact an appropriate transition. In fact, I think it's an excellent transition. It's one of the better ones that I've seen in many of the projects that we've done. So I think with that, Your Worship and members, I'm certainly able to answer any questions, and I don't want to repeat a lot of the other things that have already been said. So,
Thank you very much, Mr. Hicks. Councillor Giddings?
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. I just wanted to provide some clarification. I was at that Heritage Advisory Committee meeting, and my recollection was that the committee was unanimous in terms of their concerns over the height, the transition, the mass, the form, the look, and the adjacency not only to the district but to the heritage properties in the area. And I think that was a fairly clear message that was given by the Heritage Committee.
there was certainly concerns expressed in terms of some of those items. The way it's been described in the planning report is that it would be dealing with some of those items as we go back, but it was simply not rejected at that point in time as being totally inappropriate, certainly from my understanding of that. So.
Yeah, the Heritage Advisory Committee is that an advisory committee, and they weren't obviously they weren't able to reject the plan. Their purpose was to comment on it.
Right.
And their comments are accurately reflected by what I had said.
And that, as I say, that's why we tried to work with Mr. Temporelli, who we respect in terms of his abilities to act as a heritage architect. So.
Any other questions? Councillor Adams?
I'll also give you a motion to go past the hour of 10. I thought it would be needed, and I'm really glad that we're doing this tonight, not last night. I know it's the sore point. I'm sorry.
All right, you were right.
I've been here 29 hours already.
That's right. So you made a few comments about not seeing the need or not believing there was an issue associated with shadowing. Can you reiterate your comments about that?
The plan that's here, again, is north is directly this location. Sun rises at the highest, at the most northerly point in the summer in this location. In the winter, it basically rises about here. Sunset here in the summer at summer solstice. Sunset in winter is probably over here. So basically, the sun is all coming from this direction. So there is some shadowing, obviously, of the Rick Day property. There's no question about that. In terms of shadowing on the building to the, what I will effectively call the west and south, there will be no impact in terms of shadowing on that building. So.
Okay, so shadowing was one of the concerns that was raised.
Right.
As a result of any of that, was there any further review or study done or not?
In terms of its impact on the buildings on Dunn Street?
On any of the adjacent properties?
No, I've not done it at this point. So.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Hicks, let's turn back to your compass there.
Yes.
The rightmost line, I think does it say sunset?
Sunrise here, sunset there, so yeah.
Okay, sunset. So having regard for the sunset, if you align your pen with the sunset line.
Yes.
And perhaps just pull it towards the other edge of the drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Will I be accurate if I conclude that there will be a shadow on the property to the left of, to my left of this proposal?
In its current state, yes. In future possible developed state, it would be no different than the shadowing that you would find anywhere through the central business district of one building adjacent to another building with a 0 lot line setback requirement. So.
Okay, so as far as I know, we're dealing with the here and the now.
Right, yes.
And so you appear to be agreeing that there would be a substantial shadow on that property.
There would be a shadow at sunset on that property. I would have to do the study to show you what the sun is through the 5 continuous hours through the day, and my statement would be that there wouldn't be any shadow impact on that property through those 5 continuous hours of sunlight.
So they would have sunlight. They would have 5 hours of sunlight.
Definitely.
Even if there's this other shadow. The only other question I have for you is, if the council were of the opinion that this is overdevelopment, about which I gather we would disagree, would you, as an architect, be able to design something that would not arouse these concerns about overdevelopment here?
I suppose one could always say you could design something that might not arouse the concerns. Having done this for 30 years, I'm sure that no matter what I put on that building or on that site is going to arouse some concerns. And I mean, one of the things that was raised as an example before of the existing C3R zoning bylaw that allows 10 meters in height. Well, it also says, everyone skipped by the words after that. I said exclusive of roof. I could build a building in that C3R zoning bylaw that's about 20 meters in height if I want to put a roof on it. So I think that, in my opinion, answering your question, can I do something that would be more acceptable to the residents? Obviously, I'd have to say that that's possible to do. Would that meet the objectives of, number one, the developer? Would that provide us with the investment income to allow us to articulate the building properly, use the proper materials? We're using slate on the roof. We're using high-quality materials in this building. There's always this trade-off that I have in discussing with many different residents. You can reduce the number of units, you can reduce the height, but as you do that, when you have to pay for parking underground, something's going to give somewhere in the building. And something, usually where that gives, is in the quality of the materials on the exterior of the building. That's one of the first areas. So there's always this trade-off back and forth. Do I think this is appropriate? I still stand steadfast and believe that this is appropriate in terms of its character, and it fit within the neighborhood. So.
You've been practicing in Oakville for a long time, right?
I have been. So.
Refresh my memory, how many years?
I hate to think about it, but 1991, I think, probably. So 23 years.
So has anything ever happened in your practice in Oakville to lead you to be surprised at the reaction that you're evoking?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would not expect anything different. But
are there other members of the public with information for council on this item? We have 29 minutes left, and you should govern yourselves accordingly. Mr. Mallon. Welcome. Council has your communication, and we look forward to your new information.
Your Worship, Councillors, thank you for this opportunity. I would just like to register that we have made a written delegation. We have covered a number of points in that. I know the hour is late, and I won't test anyone's patience by spending too much time here at all. We are concerned, as a residents' association, about the height, the massing, all of the issues that have been discussed. Most of all, we're concerned about context and the character of the existing established neighbourhood. In our view, this is not consistent with the neighbourhood, and it is not an appropriate development for the context in which we find it on Trafalgar Road. It's close to Georgia Square. It's close to many, many very well established and rather elegant, in some instances, historical properties, and it's just not the right thing for this location.
So before I was just anxious that you not dart back to your seat. I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure you didn't leave.
Thank you.
So don't leave. So I have a question for you. In addition to your other concerns, which you've just stated, and having regard for all you've heard tonight, there's been another note in discussion here, which is this concern about overdevelopment. Do you or TCRA have a view about the question of overdevelopment?
Indeed, yes. The overdevelopment really relates to the lot coverage, how much of the lot is left after the building is erected for trees, for green space, for daylight between buildings, the issue of massing. The streetscape in this instance is really Trafalgar Road. It's not Dunn Street. Dunn is at the back of this. The opposite property is two-story. I believe it's a seniors' residence. The property to the south, it's a hypothesis to suggest that, well, this will eventually become a four-story or five-story or six-story building. We don't know. What exists today is a rather elegant two-story house, and it will be completely dwarfed by the massing of this proposed development. So, on the other hand, I must say, we realize development will occur, and appropriate scale development is welcome, and we realize intensification will happen. We don't think this is the right location for the densities that are being discussed in this development.
So I know that you and your residents association identify with the downtown Oakville Village perhaps more than others might because of your proximity to it. Is that correct?
I would say that's very correct, yes.
Earlier you heard that in our growth area of the downtown, we have a plan that says there's room for 80 more residential units. You remember that?
Yes.
So having regard for the health and vitality of the central core of the downtown, what we think of as the high street or the shopping district, do you or your residents association have a view as to where would be the best placement for the 80 units that we can still fit into the downtown? Where in your view would they do the most good for the town or for the downtown core?
Well, first of all, I'm an engineer, not a planner, so what I'm reflecting here is the views of the discussions we've had about downtown Oakville, and the development that appears to be occurring and appears to be well accepted and consistent with many of the properties that exist would be roughly between Trafalgar, Church, and maybe one street north of Church. But that would be approximately the limit, and I would suggest that within that area, roughly from Allen to Navy, there is opportunity to accommodate easily 80.
So let me see if I understand correctly. You may be suggesting that the closer the remaining 80 units that we have to distribute, the closer they were to the core activity of the village, the more likely they would be to help the vitality and the business activity of the village?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
The microphone to say this. I saw no other hands, but I'll ask one more time if there's any other members of the public, and I'll restrict it to table. And Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a motion, a proposed motion that I'd like to make at this time, if I could speak with it.
You have the floor.
That zoning bylaw application Z1613.59 be refused, as the proposal would lead to overdevelopment of the site and is not compatible with the existing neighborhood. Mayor Burton, last year you suggested that the proponents and area residents get together to discuss the proposal that came through at the public meeting. I attended 2 of those meetings. I understand there were some others, and the major changes that I see are that the total number of units have been reduced from 13 to 11, which now meets the parking bylaws, and the provision of solid screens on the southwest balconies and a few other minor changes. This proposal remains at 4 stories rather than the permitted 3. The allowed 10-meter height is exceeded by 50% at the front and 40% at the rear, facing the residents on Dunn Street. At 4 stories, the proposal is approximately 2 meters higher than the adjacent development to the back. There are neighboring heritage properties and a heritage district adjacent to this proposed development. I don't believe that the proposed height, massing, setbacks, in combination with the lack of transition, are appropriate at this location. This lot is currently vacant. It will be developed. However, the current proposal does not respect the neighbors, the adjacent heritage property, the heritage district on Trafalgar Road, or the entrance gateway of downtown Oakville. I'm concerned that relaxing the requirements of livable Oakville through the revisions to our zoning bylaws may well set an unfortunate standard, and that if allowed, the very character of this area that we have tried so hard to protect and nurture will be diminished. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. You haven't left much for anyone else to say. All I can say is well said. I will support your motion. Any other speakers? Councillor Bird?
As Dave said, that I can only speak for my vote. As I say, I'm going to certainly support the motion on the floor. We've had some discussions over the weekend. I thank Bill for the exchange of opinion here, but in my opinion, this is out of character with the neighborhood, with the intent of the official plan. It's not compatible. It's not complementary due to height, size, and massing. So I certainly support the motion to deny the proposal.
Shall I put the vote? All those in favor of Councillor Giddings' motion to reject? All those in favor, against his motion? Your motion carries, Councillor Giddings. The application is refused. Council, we now, I believe, come to the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee item on the agenda. I think we've dispatched every other item over our marathon meeting. Councillor Giddings, do you want to speak to this item?
Yes, I understand that staff has a report if anybody would like it. At the last Heritage meeting, there was a request for demolition on William Street, and the recommendation was to allow for demolition, and the Heritage Committee turned that down. It was a two-part recommendation to allow for demolition and rebuilding. And as the demolition part was refused, it did not get to the point of the plans for the rebuilding.
So are you moving the report and the recommendation?
I will move the report and recommendation made by the Heritage Oakville Committee, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Speakers? Shall I put the vote? Ms. Baker, I forgot, you're a registered delegation. You don't have a lot of time.
I know, and I won't take a lot of time. I'm here actually to ask for you.
And I'll ask you to use the microphone.
Sorry, again, I apologize. I'm here to actually ask you to support staff's recommendation as it relates to this application, and I just want to put it in a little bit of context. What you have before you is a very quick one-line recommendation from the Heritage Committee, and my thanks to Councillor Giddings for a bit of the summary on that. But that was a 2.5-hour meeting that analyzed this, and that comes on the heels of an 8-month process where my client worked very hard with Heritage staff and Heritage Oakville, and came to a conclusion that was a result of much compromise on my client's part, but that staff and my client could ultimately live with. We support staff's recommendation for the following reasons. The Heritage Impact Study has analyzed the house using the evaluation criteria of OREG 0906 and find that the property has limited heritage value and does not meet any of the criteria in any significant way. And that's the analysis done by Heritage staff in accordance with the legislation. That's what the Ontario Municipal Board would look at. That's what the Heritage architects look at, 0906. And they've concluded that there isn't, it doesn't meet the criteria in any significant way. And that's directly as a result of a number of alterations that have occurred to that property over the length of its time. The one feature that they did indicate that has some heritage value are the windows, and staff has recommended that those windows be made available for salvage. Staff have noticed that the structural condition of the house, trying to repair that would impact, in fact, any heritage value of the property. And as well, it's important to note the exterior cladding and trim of the house are not historic. They need to be removed since the cladding is made of asbestos. And additionally, the UV insulation inside the house would need to be removed at the same time as the cladding. And after all that work is completed, you'd essentially be left with a shell with no historic features that would remain. There's a detached garage on the property, and staff have noted that this is likely constructed in the 1940s of a simple design and has no significant heritage value. Staff recommends the demolition of the property, and we certainly support that recommendation. The second part of the application was with relation to the new house. The applicant is proposing a frame house, a simple design frame house, and I'm just going to give you the key pieces on this. Again, they met numerous times with respect to the house, and staff characterizes the drawing to be the applicant has adjusted the original proposal to ensure that the design and size of the house is in keeping with the district. The proposed house has a simple vernacular style that's influenced by and does not replicate other nearby properties. The modest appearance of the house allows it to blend with its surroundings without visually overwhelming any nearby vernacular style homes. At the same time, details like wood cladding, wood trim, 2/2 windows ensure the house embodies the character of the neighborhood. And they conclude that the house design is considered to be in keeping with the guidelines of the district plan and compatible with its surroundings. So it looked at it in the context of staff's Heritage Conservation District plan, and that it would be in keeping with its with the surroundings. I would say that staff recognize that the footprint of the house is consistent with other homes in the area, and I know we're very, very short for time, but I just want to say staff recommended approval of the application, the new construction permit application, I would say, with 4 conditions of approval, and I would say that my client has no concerns with those conditions of approval as recommended by staff. Thank you.
Thank you for your information. Any questions, Council? All right, I have a question for you, Council. I support the staff recommendations on this matter, and if we were to defeat the motion by Councillor Giddings, I would, if necessary, transfer the chair to the acting mayor to move a motion in support of the staff recommendations. And I'll ask again if there's any other comment or Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I ask that if, when we have the vote, that we separate the 2 items that were in the staff recommendation, one being the request for demolition, the second being for the rebuilding of the house, the new property. When it was at committee for 2.5 hours, there was rich discussion on the demolition as well as on the rebuilding of the house, and the general feeling of the committee was that they didn't feel the new home was was quite there in terms of appropriateness or size for the district. And so I would ask that we separate the vote, so if I'm not successful on the first, that the proponent would come back, work through staff, and it come back through the Heritage Oakville Committee.
Under our procedure bylaw, you're allowed to separate on request, so there's no question that we'll separate the items. And if I understand the councillor's drift here, I'm not unfriendly to that outcome. And Councillor Bird?
And before we issued a permission to demolish, we had to approve the plan of what was going in. They had to go, they're conjoined, if you will. You just didn't allow a demolition permit like we've had before, and then we'll have a separate application. That they should be issued at the same time. So we should be working. I'm concerned about the house now. I don't know how you could restore the house. It's got UV and whatever it is in there, the existing house, but I'm not really convinced that they spend a lot of time, and I only have to defer to the members of the committee on the new house. We're hung up on whether we can somehow refurbish the existing house. So maybe I'm incorrect, but I know what we're trying to say is we want to put the two together. They should be joined together, one approving a new house and the demolition be issued at that point in time once we agree on the replacement.
Councillor Ilger.
We're sitting here almost 20 after 10. It seems like maybe there's a lot more discussion required on this whole issue. Is there any reason why we cannot refer this to our next meeting? To have adequate discussion?
Madam Director.
Thank you. Through your worship to Councillor Algar, with a demolition permit, there is a timing issue, and Mr. Hanna can speak to that. I think he can also speak to the suggestion by Councillor Giddings to separate the items, as Councillor Bird mentioned as well, so to clarify what a council could have before them.
Yes, Councillor, go ahead, Mr. Hanna. I think you're going to talk about how the clock has started.
Thank you, Your Worship, to members of council. Just on the first issue of the separation, staff are certainly not opposed to the separation if it goes that route with council, because there would be a requirement for a separate permit to come back for the new house. And I would agree with Councillor Giddings that there was considerable discussion on both matters at Heritage Oakville, both the demo and also the new structure. And there was some concern about the new structure as well. So again, if you go that route, yeah, I'm in your hands, but we would certainly not be opposed.
All right. So is there, in respect to the demolition clock?
Yeah, I was just checking the report, Your Worship, and we could, it would appear that we could defer to March, because it is, you have to deal with it by April the 10th. However, I would like you to deal with it tonight. That would be my personal opinion.
I think it's fairly simple, especially as Mr. Hanna has explained. I don't think we need extensive discussion. In any event, the motion is properly on the floor to approve the recommendation of the Heritage Committee to refuse the demolition permit. Correct, Councillor Giddings? And if we will defeat that motion, I'm in agreement with my colleague about granting the demolition and deferring or holding off on the other part of it. So with that, I think we've done enough, and we can call the vote. All those in favor of Councillor Giddings' motion to approve the report and the recommendations, please signify. All those against? I'm looking, I can't see hands. Okay, so Councillor Giddings has moved approval of the Heritage Oakville report and recommendation. If you reject that motion, his motion has the effect of refusing the demolition permit, right? And And you can't refuse it forever, if you'll recall. Council? So everybody understands that you can't refuse a demolition permit forever? Right, so. So now do we all understand what we're voting on? And if it fails, then the next motion would be to approve the demolition and to refer back the new house, which is a compromise the councillor and I have agreed on. Is that all right? So, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. All those opposed, please raise your hands. The motion fails. Councillor Giddings, would you like to move the compromise, or would you like me to yield the chair and move it?
No point in you yielding the chair in the interest of time. I'd like to move that the proponent come back and work through staff and come through Heritage Oakville on the plans for their new property.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the report and reject the recommendation, and to refer the new house back to staff for more work, if I've captured that correctly. And Ms. Weiss advised differently. Your expression says we could phrase this better.
My preference would be to see it written down before I can comment.
Pardon?
If it could be written down, I missed part of it because it was being spoken back and forth.
Council would like a resolution, if you could oblige us, that would have the effect of permitting the demolition and referring the house matter back to staff for more work, and then go to Heritage and come back to council. And then along the way, we'd like to adopt the rest of the report of the Heritage Committee. I think I've stated it perfectly clearly.
If you refer the matter back, according to what Mr. Hanna said, you're going to run out of time, because there's a time consideration for the permit as well. So I think what's before you is to approve or refuse the new construction permit. And
We're not of a mind to approve the new construction.
Then I think you have to refuse it, because if you refer it back, I'm just relying on Mr. Hanna's timing issue, unless you refer it to come back before April, the April date that Mr. Hanna said, because it's still a 90-day time period.
All right, so Mr. Hanna, was your advice to approve the demolition and reject the house?
Through your worship, that would seem to make sense.
Thank you. That's the motion then. All right. All those in favor? Do we all understand? So everybody understand the motion? All those in favor? Those opposed? We're allowing the demolition and refusing the house. And they'll bring something to planning staff because they still need a permit. That carried. And we have 5 minutes. It's a luxury. And that was included. So now we need a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Knoll, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1 and 2, public hearing item 3, discussion items 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and advisory committee minutes item 10, as noted by the clerk. A mover and seconder for this report, please. Councillor Elgar, Councillor Grant, all those in favor? Opposed? The report is adopted. Council, is there any new business which might occupy us in our remaining minutes? Thank you. Could we have a mover and seconder for the bylaws? Councillor Giddings and Councillor Robinson, thank you. All in favor? I need more hands. Thank you.
Just the numbers, because we didn't pass all.
All right, so they are 2014, you're not quite done, Council. 2014-29 and 2014-32. And that now completes our work. Thank you for your time and attention. It's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.